Chapter 3357. Muyaja finally agreed. Yu Yu smiled, walked forward, and stuffed a purple crystal into Xiao Chen's clenched fist. In the rush of the crowd, many of the purple crystals had been squeezed out and rolled around. However, he held them tightly. There were still 2 left. These were gifts from Xiao Chen. Now, he gave them to him as a possession talisman. Yu Yu was really worried about Xiao Chen. Therefore, he hoped that Muyaja would take Xiao Chen away as soon as possible for treatment. Yin Shirshir said, Yu Yu, I'll stay with you. Mommy, be good and listen to me. I'll be fine. You'll only make things worse if you stay. After all, it's more troublesome to protect 2 people than 1. As he spoke, he took a few steps back and waved his hand. Muyaja hugged Yin Shirshir's shoulders and brought her onto the helicopter. When the people on the deck saw this, they mustered their courage and walked toward the helicopter with hope of survival. A few mercenaries stepped forward and stood in front of Yu Yu to protect him. They raised their submachine guns and fired at the deck. Everyone retreated a few steps in fright and could only watch helplessly as the helicopter slowly ascended and left. Yu Yu sighed and turned around to look for something on the floor. When the mercenaries behind him saw this, they walked forward and asked curiously, Sir, what are you looking for? I'll look for it for you. No need. You won't find it. I don't even know what I'm looking for. I'll look for it myself. As Yu Yu spoke, he lay on the floor and carefully looked for it. What he said just now was just an excuse. He stayed because he wanted to find the remaining purple crystals as soon as possible. He turned around and searched the deck. Finally, he found a few purple crystals scattered on the floor. He held them tightly in his palm as if they were his most precious treasure. Great, I finally found them. When he got home, he would string them together into a bracelet. He had to make it stronger and protect it carefully. He could not lose it so easily again. In the distance, another helicopter flew over and landed on the deck. The people on the deck were hopeful, but they did not dare to go forward. They were afraid of the 2 mercenaries beside Yu Yu. They were well-built and looked well-trained. Moreover, they had guns in their hands. Bullets did not have eyes. Otherwise, they would have gone forward and boarded the rescue helicopter. Another mercenary walked down from the helicopter. Yu Yu ordered him to bring Dyrus onto the helicopter. He planned to bring him back to Hurricane's headquarters to settle the score. And Yu, and Yu. Only a handful of the people here. You. You. She's only 3 years old. Hearing this, Yu could not help but feel a little sympathetic for her. The girl in his arms did not know what was going on. She looked at him innocently with her big, watery eyes and sucked on her fingers. Yu looked at her and his heart softened. In reality, he did not plan to save anyone on the ship. Most of the people who entered and exited this cruise ship were rich and ruthless nobles. They took human lives for fun just because they had a lot of money. Chapter 3358. Some of them had lost their conscience, and such people were not worth saving. However, Yu thought of his mother when he saw the innocent child. If it was his mother, she would sacrifice herself to protect him. His heart softened when he thought of this. The woman continued to plead, Please, the child is innocent. Yu was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking. Finally, he said calmly, Bring the girl onto the plane. The woman's eyes lit up, and she immediately handed the little girl over to them, thanking them profusely. Yu boarded the plane, and the mercenaries escorted Dietrich into the cabin. Only then did they realize that Dietrich had left a suitcase beside him. This old man did not forget to bring money with him, even when he was running for his life. The plane started slowly, and the propellers stirred up waves as it slowly rose into the air. When they were in the air and looking down at the cruise ship, Yu realized that the huge cruise ship had broken apart from the middle. Just as Xiao Chen had said, the cruise ship had hit a reef. It was probably a very hard reef that had split open the ship's belly. The bottom of the ship must have been split open. Endless seawater poured into the crack and into the cabin. The bottom 2 floors had probably been submerged by the seawater. The hull of the ship was very long, and its buoyancy was affected, causing it to sink continuously. The middle of the ship had also started to break apart due to the imbalance of gravity. Yu sat on the cruise ship with lingering fear. He did not dare to imagine that if his uncle's men had not arrived in time, the cruise ship would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. However, this was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was the desperate crowd on the ship. In the face of death, the most selfish instincts of human nature were revealed. Perhaps they would not be able to wait until the cruise ship sank and would be trampled to death by the crazy crowd. Yu heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could completely relax, he heard a man's sinister laughter behind him. Ha ha! Yu was shocked. He turned around and looked at Beatrice. He did not know when he had woken up. This cunning man, if he was not sure that he was tied up tightly, he would have been nervous. However, he was clearly the one in the most passive position right now, so how could he still laugh? Yu asked coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Dietrich smiled, revealing a mouthful of sinister teeth. "I'm laughing at your naivety." "What? Do you really think you're safe now?" "Naive? Who is the naive one?" Yu snorted coldly without any expression on her face. She did not want to talk to him anymore. But Beatrice continued to ask, "Why didn't you leave me on the cruise ship? I don't think you're so kind-hearted as to really want to save me. Don't tell me you don't want me to die." Yu said, "I'm keeping you alive because we still have a score to settle between us." "Settle the score?" "Oh," Beatrice replied curiously. "What do you want to settle with me?" "Mommy's debt, Xiaoqin's debt, and the debt between you and me. All of this should be accounted for. It just so happens that I also have a score that I want to settle with you. However, I'm afraid you won't have a chance to do so." "What do you mean?" Before Yu could finish speaking, he saw Beatrice's mouth move. He widened his eyes in confusion and saw that Beatrice was grinning slightly. Between his lips, there was something black. Chapter 33:59. It looked like a piece of plastic, but it wasn't as simple as plastic. He seemed to have been holding it in his mouth for a long time, embedded between his teeth. Yu took a closer look and saw that it was a mini mechanism. He instinctively raised his hand to protect his eyes. However, this thing didn't seem to be the hidden weapon he had imagined. Beatrice bit the thing and exerted some force. Then he heard a long beep sound. A beep, beep, beep electronic sound came from his body. "What's that sound?" Yu ordered. "Go and take a look. Something on his body is making a sound." "Yes." The mercenary walked forward. Beatrice stared at him like a tiger watching its prey, but his lips were curled into a smug and cold-blooded smile, as if he was determined to get his hands on him. "Behave yourself." The man punched him, and the thing in his mouth fell to the ground due to the huge inertia. He picked it up and looked at it. His eyes were shocked. He kicked Dietrich to the ground and lifted his clothes. Sure enough, he saw a small mini box on his waist. He opened the box and saw that it was a mini-time bomb. The bomb had already started its countdown. 60 seconds were running out. Yu also saw the bomb on his body. He stood up and walked to Beatrice's side, his eyes wide open in shock. "You! Ha ha ha!" Beatrice laughed crazily. He knew that he was going to die. Even if Yu spared his life, he would make him wish he was dead. He had already expected this. Hence, the bomb on his body was his last resort. Beatrice's lips split open and he laughed arrogantly. "Ha ha ha! Since I'm going to die sooner or later, rather than die in your hands, why don't you accompany me to hell? How about it?" Yu was so angry that he gritted his teeth. The mercenary squatted down to study the bomb, but Beatrice was calm. He said coldly, "I advise you not to move. Once this bomb is activated, it's only a matter of time before it explodes. Don't waste your time. Die with me. In your dreams." Yu immediately said, "Open the hatch and throw him into the sea." The mercenary nodded, squatted down, and nimbly removed the chains on his body. When they boarded the plane, in order to stabilize him, Yu had ordered people to tie him to the rack. Now, the chains were heavy, and it would take some effort to untie him. Beatrice laughed even more proudly. "You're too smart for your own good. When you've undone it, throw me into the sea. You won't be able to escape death." "Shut up. Don't underestimate this bomb. It's so small, but I don't mind letting you see its power." Yu gritted his teeth and grabbed his collar, glaring at him. "Don't you dare." 30 seconds left. The bomb was about to explode. It's too late. He made a prompt decision. He knew that if they wasted time on unlocking the chains, they would really be buried with Dietrich. The mercenary opened the hatch and looked at the sea. He turned around and exchanged glances with Yu Yu. He nimbly put an oxygen mask on Yu Yu's face and hugged him in his arms. Yu Yu immediately understood what he was going to do. Are you crazy? Sir, I'm very conscious. Chapter 3360. You have to understand that if you jump from such a high plane, it's no different from falling from a 10-story building. Trust me. The mercenary carried him to the cabin door and hugged the child tightly. The other two mercenaries also approached. The pilot initiated the emergency landing procedure and walked to the cabin door as well. Muyaja walked to the back of the ship and looked into the distance. In midair, the helicopter was slowly approaching. It could be seen with the naked eye and would land in a few minutes. Yin Shishir and Xiao Yichen had already been sent to the ship's medical team. Muyaja was only concerned about Yu Yu, so he walked to the helipad to wait for him. Gong Jie was looking into the distance with a pair of binoculars when he suddenly noticed something. His eyes widened, and he was extremely shocked. What's going on? Muyaja, who had originally calmed down, immediately became nervous. He snatched the binoculars from Gong Jie's hands and saw the cabin door open. A few mercenaries stood at the cabin door in an orderly manner. The biting cold wind blew, and one of them was holding a child tightly. He recognized at a glance that the child in the man's arms was Yu Yu. However, the strange thing was that they were planning to jump off the plane. Muyaja almost didn't have time to think. The next second, he saw 4 people jump out of the cabin door one after another. Their bodies were like feathers, lightly floating toward the sea. What's going on? Gong Jie also saw this scene. He rushed to the railing nervously and held the handrail nervously. However, there was a loud boom. Then, the helicopter exploded in an instant. It was as if a curtain of fire had exploded in the night sky. Even though they were far away, they seemed to be able to feel the air waves caused by the explosion. It was almost spreading toward them. The deck also shook, and the explosion caused strong waves on the sea. The ship was slightly jolted. Gong Jie was frightened, and his breathing suddenly stopped. Muyaja clenched his fists, but his gaze was fixed on the figure that kept falling toward the sea. His heart suddenly stopped beating. It seemed that the explosion had occurred in the cabin. The entire fuselage shook, and the propeller was broken and scattered. At that moment, it was as if the end of the world had arrived. The entire world was gray, and the turbulence was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The tragic fire and a cloud of fire instantly disintegrated the helicopter into ruins, and the black wreckage kept falling toward the sea. Muyaja's eyes suddenly turned red. Yu Yu! Gong Jie was so shocked that his throat seemed to be blocked, and he could not make a sound. No. Yu Yu was hugged tightly to the man's chest. His large palm protected the back of the boy's head as he buried his face in his chest. His large body formed a bundle that wrapped the boy in his embrace. He only felt that the two of them were in a straight parabola, like a sharp needle, piercing through the air and piercing into the calm sea. The burning wreckage kept falling, and among them, there was a broken propeller that smashed onto the man's back. There was a loud sound, and he seemed to have heard the sound of his back breaking. He was so nervous that he closed his eyes and fell into endless despair. Crash. Chapter 3361. Even though Yu Yu was being held tightly in someone's arms, and the impact was reduced significantly, falling from a height of more than 20 meters and hitting the surface of the sea was undoubtedly the same impact as falling from a tall building. He held onto his breathing mask tightly and greedily sucked in a meager amount of oxygen. The mercenary who was holding on to him suffered a huge blow to the head. He suffered from intracranial hemorrhage and died on the spot. Even though he was already dead, he was still holding on to him tightly. Unfortunately, it was this kind of protection. Yu Yu was locked tightly in his arms. As his body fell, he kept falling into the abyss. He was getting further and further away from the surface of the sea. He kept reaching out, but it was all in vain. Mommy. Yu Yu struggled to open his mouth, and a string of vague syllables escaped. Daddy, brother, he kept struggling. His survival instinct made him want to live. More importantly, it was because he was worried about the person in his heart. Yow. The helicopter disintegrated in the air. The burning wreckage fell into the sea and floated on the surface of the sea. The sky was filled with smoke. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky was turning bright. The horizon stretched as far as the eye could see. Two huge armed ships surrounded the area where Yu fell. The aircraft carrier was parked in the center. It lowered its speedboats and started to salvage the area. More than 10 speedboats rushed on the sea, cleaning up the floating oil on the surface of the sea at the fastest speed. A whole hour had passed. So many people had been sent out. So far, they had only salvaged the wreckage of the helicopter and an undamaged suitcase. The $500 million in the suitcase was still intact. Xiao Chen was still unconscious. Yin Shishir was unconscious for a short while. When she woke up, her heart stopped beating when she heard the bad news. Yu had fallen into the sea. There was no news of him until now. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Yin Shishir could not take such a huge blow. She could not believe it. However, when she rushed out of the cabin and saw the scene in front of her with her own eyes, she finally believed that Yu had really fallen into the sea and disappeared. The reason for the fall was the explosion of the helicopter. However, the exact cause of the explosion was still unknown. Falling from a height of more than 20 meters into the sea, his life or death was unknown. Muyaja was still worried. He put on a diving suit and personally went to the sea to search for Yu. Gong Jie calmly commanded while comforting the terrified Yin Shishir. Yin Shishir guarded the cabin and did not go anywhere. She was full of hope that the people in charge of the salvage would bring back good news. However, other than some wreckage, some parts, and a few floating corpses, there was no breakthrough. The deepest part of the sea was thousands of meters deep. So far, the people that were sent out were mainly searching within 300 meters of the sea surface. 300 meters was the maximum range that could be searched. The deeper parts of the sea were places that humans could not go. It was too dangerous and required the use of instruments. The ship was equipped with such instruments and had been thrown into the sea. However, the images that were sent back did not show any clues. They were already narrowing down the scope of the salvage operation. It would take a lot of effort just to salvage the wreckage, not to mention an 8-year-old child. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Sir, a diver came back to report that they had found a corpse. Yin Shishir stood up agitatedly, and her brother immediately asked her what kind of corpse it was. Chapter 3362. The diver said the body was chained up, and his body was badly mutilated. However, after identification, we can confirm that he's from Diatrisborn. After a brief examination, we found that he had explosives tied to his body, so we can confirm the cause of the accident. Explosives? Yes, a suicide bomber. Gong Jie gritted his teeth in hatred. This sly old fox, even in death, he wanted to take someone down with him. Before the oxygen in the oxygen tank ran out, Mu Yaja returned to the shore. He took off his diving goggles, looked back at the sea, and bit his lip hard. He had been searching for 2 hours without stopping. In the cold sea, he had almost exhausted all his energy. He ate some compressed biscuits to replenish his energy, changed his oxygen tank, and prepared to go back into the water. Gong Jie stopped him. Are you crazy? Unlike on land, the energy consumption in the sea is several times higher. Don't push yourself too hard. Muyaja turned around and looked at him. We don't know whether Yu is dead or alive. Do you want me to stay on the shore and do nothing? I can't do that. At least, you should rest for a while. Gong Jie said again. If you consume too much energy, it'll be dangerous. I know what to do. Gong Jie wanted to say something, but Muyaja turned around and left quickly. Now, every minute and second was incomparably precious to him. The salvage operation lasted for 5 hours, but there was no news. The golden rescue period was slowly approaching, and the hope of survival was getting slimmer and slimmer. They found a few more bodies, but other than the bodies of the 3 mercenaries, there was still no news of the pilot and Yu. For a moment, they felt that something was amiss. In such a short period of time, it was impossible for a person to fall too deep, let alone be washed too far away by the waves. Gong Jia had sealed off the sea area as soon as possible. Basically, Yi would only be in this area, so how could they not catch him? In the regenerated sea area, a person would not sink because the sea was buoyant. 300 meters was already very deep, and a person could not sink to a few thousand meters in such a short period of time. That would be inconceivable. Where could they have gone? Gong Jia was both anxious and worried. This sudden turn of events had caught him off guard. Yun Shishir was already on the verge of collapse. She stood guard on the boat. Even though she was exhausted, she didn't dare to close her eyes. He was worried that once he opened his eyes, the whole world would be turned upside down. The more time passed, and the more there was no news, the more she blamed herself. If it wasn't for her, Yu wouldn't be in such a dangerous situation. She was such a failure. What kind of danger did he encounter that he needed his 2 sons to save him? She also found out about Yu's other identity. She did not expect Yu to be related to the Hurricane Group. She also did not know that Yu was one of the core members of the Hurricane Group. She originally thought that Yu had a toy company that was currently being managed by Li Hanlin. She did not expect that he had an even deeper identity. She did not know much and did not have the heart to care, but she knew that the culprit who kidnapped her this time, Dietrich, was after Yu. Dietrich and the Hurricane Group had a deep grudge. Hence, even if he died, he swore to drag Yu down to hell with him. If she had known, but there was no such thing. She had been kept in the dark from the beginning. Chapter 3363. Yun Shishir was almost suffocating from the pain. If anything happened to Yu, she would never forgive herself. Too much time had passed, and all the people who went into the sea were exhausted. Gong Xiaojun naturally could not withdraw the team. If they could not salvage it in 5 hours, then they would spend 10 or even 20 hours. He did not believe that there would be no news at all. However, for now, no news was the best news. Hurricane Headquarters. The medical center was on standby. The phone suddenly rang. Gong Xiaoying received the call, and his expression became serious. He led the team to the helipad. In the distance, a helicopter flew over slowly, circled once, and slowly landed on the helipad. The wind was a little strong. Gong Xiaoying narrowed his eyes slightly. Looking at the helicopter that landed steadily on the helipad, his gaze became scorching hot. The cabin door opened, and a pilot in a sorry state jumped out. He was holding a child wrapped in a blanket in his arms and hurried to Gong Xiaoying. Gong Xiaoying asked in a low voice, "Is he okay?" The pilot took a deep breath, shook his head, and answered in a serious tone, "Boss, fortunately, he's fine. He's just hit the back of his head, and he's unconscious." Gong Xiaoying raised his hand and untied the blanket, revealing the child's delicate but pale face. The child's eyes were tightly shut. His long eyelashes were wet from the seawater, and his slightly greenish eyelids were probably frozen by the seawater. His skin was extremely cold, and there was no warmth. The seawater was cold, and after being soaked in it for a long time, his originally fair face was even paler than before. Because he was wearing an oxygen mask, there were dark red marks from his nose to his mouth. The oxygen mask had been removed. The child was still unconscious. Gong Xiaoying's expression changed slightly. He scrutinized the child's face carefully, and he was a little moved. Similar. Very similar. Those eyebrows, those eyes, that perky nose, they were somewhat similar to Mu Qingqing's. They were similar in appearance and spirit. This child was very much like his grandmother. Especially those eyes. They reminded him of her at first glance. However, due to his injuries, he looked extremely weak. Gong Xiaoying was well aware of the child's identity. Other than being his grandson, he was also one of the core people in charge of Project Heaven's Eye. For the past few years, he had been kept in the dark and didn't know anything. However, when Yi returned to the island with Gong Jia, someone leaked the news. When he returned to the headquarters, he heard some rumors. Following the clues, he quickly found out the child's identity. It turned out that his daughter had given birth to such a genius grandson. He had never believed that the person who came up with the Sky Eye plan was really an 8-year-old child. What was even more unbelievable was that this child was his grandson. At such a young age, he had already surpassed his master. He was proud of this, but he also felt that it was a pity that he had only just found out that Yu Yu was his grandson. He couldn't help but sigh. How is he? Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. He immediately ordered, "Hurry up and send him to the medical center." At the medical center, the operating theater, Alice received the notice and rushed over. However, she was slightly stunned when she saw the child lying on the operating table. This child was not Gong Jie's. Back then, Gong Jie had threatened and bribed her to keep this secret from Gong Xiaoying. Chapter 3364. Gong Xiaoying was standing in front of the operating table. When he saw her, he called her over. "Alice." "Yes, this is my grandson. I'll hand him over to you. You must cure him." Alice was stunned for a long time until Gong Xiaoying's cold gaze landed on her. She hurriedly nodded and said, "Understood." She did not dare to disobey Gong Xiaoying's orders. Before she came, her subordinates had already done a series of precise examinations on the child. Other than some external injuries, a moderate concussion, and slight intracranial damage, the child's various functions could be said to be very poor. How poor? If these conditions were not improved, he would not live past 20 years. This was not an exaggeration. The medical elites gathered at the Hurricane Group's headquarters were definitely the best in the world. Basically, this was a conservative estimate. 20 years was still a relatively optimistic situation. The various functions of his organs were not optimistic, especially his organs. Yu Yu's heart was naturally fragile and weak. Moreover, his physique was not satisfactory. Compared to Xiao Yichen's physique, Yu Yu's physique had always been poor since he was born. After years of careful treatment, although there were some improvements year by year, it could be said to be minimal. Alice took the report and flipped through a few pages. Her expression was grave. "There's a big problem with his heart." "What problem?" "Congenital heart failure." When Gong Xiaoying heard this, his heart suddenly sank. According to Gong Jie, Alice said carefully, this child was born prematurely. He was not even a month old. His older brother's physique is very strong. It's probably because he was deprived of nutrients in his mother's womb that he developed poorly. Gong Xiaoying's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. You already knew about this child's existence. Alice's heart skipped a beat, and she did not speak for a moment. Gong Xiaoying's tone became more dangerous. "You hid it from me together with him?" Alice lowered her head guiltily. Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it from you." "Forget it." Gong Xiaoying waved his hand expressionlessly and said coldly, "I know. This was all his idea." Alice remained silent. "You said that he has a heart problem. Then, is there a corresponding treatment plan?" Alice looked up and hesitated for a long time before she slowly said, "It's not that I don't have one. It's just that I need some time." Gong Xiaoying frowned. "How long is a little time?" 5 years. Alice continued, "Because I don't know what level it is, I can't say for the time being. However, it's not like there are no conditions that can be improved." "Do you need a heart transplant?" "No need," Alice said bluntly. "Even if it's a heart transplant, no matter how good the medical skills are, after the transplant surgery, they can't live more than 10 years. This is already the highest record in the medical field." "Oh." Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at her. He said slowly, "I'll leave this child to you. You must do your best for me." "Yes. However, there's another thing that you have to remember. This child is now with me. You're not allowed to tell anyone about this." After a pause, Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully, including Gong Jie. Chapter 3365. "But if this child regains consciousness and wants to return to his mother's side, with his intelligence, no one can stop him from leaving this place." Alice said so. Gong Xiaoying smiled coldly when he heard this. He turned around and slowly sized her up. "Alice, you should know what this child means to me." Alice nodded and said with a smile, "This child is your grandson and your closest relative. He's very important to you. More importantly, this child is talented and is also the core figure of the Heavenly Eye Project." However, with Gong Xiaoying's stubborn personality, he could not accept Muyaja. After so many years, Gong Xiaoying's hatred for the Mu family had not disappeared at all. It was deep in his bones. This was not something that could be easily resolved with just a few words. However, Yu had also made his position clear. He was on Muyaja's side. If Gong Xiaoying could not accept Muyaja, he would definitely not acknowledge Gong Xiaoying as his grandfather. This made Gong Xiaoying very sad. More than 10 years ago, the Mu family had taken away his love. Now Muyaja had his daughter and grandson. He had also mentioned to Gong Jia that even if Yun Shishir left Muyaja, she would not be left with nothing. So far, the Hurricane Group had already dominated half of the arms industry. The Gong family was a big family. He did not care about Muyaja and the Xingyu Financial Group at all. However, father and son were connected. Yu Yu's dependence on Muyaja was not just a father-son relationship. He acknowledged that this man was enough to be his mother's support for the rest of her life. Therefore, he acknowledged him and defended him very much. However, Gong Xiaoying did not like him very much. Gong Xiaoying sneered and said, "Since you know, then you should know what to do." Alice was at a loss for words. Gong Xiaoying walked up to her slowly and said meaningfully, "I heard that you used to be a hypnotist and an authority in the field of hypnotism." Alice's gaze shook as she looked at him in disbelief. Gong Xiaoying said faintly, "I remember that you once used deep hypnosis to permanently seal part of the memories of an experimental subject." "Yes," Alice nodded solemnly. "If we use deep hypnosis, we can indeed achieve the method of sealing memories. But do we really have to do this?" Her questioning made Gong Xiaoying faintly unhappy. "Alice, don't forget your position. Yu is my grandson and my flesh and blood. I won't harm him." Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at the child lying on the operating table. He was so quiet that he looked like he was sleeping. His eyes were filled with unconcealable love. "I didn't want to do this unless I had no other choice." He suddenly turned around and gritted his teeth as he said, "I didn't want to do this either. But what can I do? I can't just watch this child return to that man's side. He already has enough. I definitely won't allow him to take Yu away." Alice could not help but want to refute. Yu was Muyaja's flesh and blood and was his beloved son. Doing this would be equally cruel to Yu and Muyaja. However, she did not have the courage to speak. After thinking for a long time, she finally nodded and said weakly, "I know what to do." "Okay." Chapter 3366. Gong Xiaoying said, "I hope you don't disappoint me." After saying that, he turned around and walked away. Alice walked to the operating table and lowered her head to look at Yu's young and delicate face. She hesitated for a moment before raising her hand to gently caress his face. Her red lips trembled slightly as she suddenly closed her eyes in desolation. "I'm sorry." In the quiet room, no light could pass through. It was dark. Smack! A lonely light came on. Alice carried Yu to the sofa and adjusted his sitting position. In his half-awake state, Yu opened his eyes slightly. His consciousness was in a state of chaos, and he could not tell if he was in reality or in a dream. She walked to the phonograph, put in a disc, and played it softly. Soothing music sounded melodiously. Alice gently bent over in front of him and raised her hand. A pocket watch fell and swayed gently. Yu opened his hazy eyes. As the pocket watch swayed gently, his eyes gradually lost focus and became empty and dark. He suddenly felt a ray of sunlight above his head, gradually sprinkling on his body, and his whole body was enveloped in warmth. Immediately after, he opened his eyes and saw an endless sea. Under the sunlight, the golden beach was beautiful and dazzling. He walked on the beach and looked around, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly, he had a splitting headache. A woman's gentle voice sounded. "Who are you?" Yu turned around warily, but there was no one in sight. "Who's talking?" The woman asked. "What's your name?" Yu answered without hesitation, "Yun Tianyu." The woman asked, "What did you see?" Yu rubbed his eyes and turned around, only to see Muyaja standing behind him and smiling at him. The expression on his face suddenly became lively. "Daddy!" He leaped forward in joy, but when he reached him and opened his arms, he caught nothing but air. He was stunned. When he looked again, the person in front of him seemed to have disappeared into thin air. "Daddy!" "He's not your daddy." What? Yu turned pale with fright. Without waiting for him to question, the woman asked step by step, "Who do you want to see the most?" "Who's talking?" Yu asked blankly. He took a few steps back in shock and bumped into a soft body. He turned around in fright, only to see Yun Shur standing behind him and smiling gently at him. "Yu, come here. Mommy." Yu walked toward her in a panic. He was so scared that he was about to cry. "Mommy." He reached out to grab Yun's hand, but in the blink of an eye, she was gone again. "Mommy." He shouted hoarsely. "Mommy." Yu. Yu heard someone calling his name again. He turned around and saw Xiao Yichen hugging Yue Yao and playing on the beach. The two little lads were diligently building a fortress and having a lot of fun. Xiao Yichen called out to him, "Yu, come over and play with us." Yu did not dare to go over. He was afraid that the two people in front of him would disappear again. "Don't." Yu walked over hesitantly, feeling lonely and helpless. "Don't leave me behind." Chapter 33:67. I didn't. Yu frantically tried to explain. "Brother, I didn't bully you." "Then where's the amethyst bracelet I gave you?" Yu quickly looked down at his wrist. The amethyst bracelet that he had been wearing was gone. "Where's the bracelet?" "You lost it." Xiao Yichen carried Yue Yao and said angrily, "Yue Yao, let's go." "Ignore him." Yue Yao looked at him coldly. She turned around and lay in Xiao Yichen's arms. Without looking at him again, she turned around and walked into the sea. Yu panicked and chased after her desperately. However, he saw Xiao Yichen carrying Yue Yao further and further away. Half of his body was covered by the sea. "Danger! Come back." Yu also rushed into the sea and shouted hysterically, "Don't leave me behind." "Brother, Yue Yao, don't leave me behind. Wait for me." A wave hit him, and he was instantly swallowed by the seawater. The salty seawater kept rushing into his mouth. He struggled desperately between his lips and teeth, but his body kept sinking. He looked at the bottom of the sea. He struggled to open his eyes. As he breathed hard, Yun Na's ferocious and terrifying face flashed across his eyes. "It's you." Yu opened his mouth wide in shock. The seawater poured into his lungs. He grabbed his hands in despair, trying to grab hold of a life-saving straw. In a boundless sea, he could not grab hold of anything. He could only let the waves hit him. When he woke up again and opened his eyes, he was in a white room. The snow-white curtains, the snow-white walls, and the snow-white bed woke him up immediately. He sat up and looked around. There was no one in the room. He was completely flustered. He lifted the blanket and ran to the door. However, the door would not open no matter how hard he tried. He hit the door in despair and cried, "Mommy! Mommy! Daddy! Daddy, where are you? Xiao Yichen, save me! Save me!" The door suddenly opened. He rushed out and saw a group of strangers standing there. They looked at him coldly and whispered in low voices, "An unwanted child. What a pity. He has no parents. Orphans so pitiful." Yu said angrily, "I have daddy. I have mommy." A voice sounded above his head. "Everything you see is just a fantasy. You don't have a mother or a father. You liar." He turned around abruptly, but all he saw was darkness. When he turned around again, the group of people had already disappeared. He was in complete darkness, unable to see his own fingers. Beneath his feet, it was as if the ground had been hollowed out, a bottomless abyss. He cautiously took a step forward, yet he heard footsteps coming from ahead. Yu turned around with tears in his eyes, only to see Yun Shur walking slowly with her back to him. She was dressed in white, and her black hair was tied up with a hairband. She looked gentle and beautiful. "Mommy." Yu wiped his tears pitifully and chased after her. "Mommy, don't leave Yu behind." "Mommy, give Mommy a hug." He chased after Yun Shur and carefully grabbed the corner of her shirt. "Mommy, give Mommy a hug." She snapped back to her senses and slapped his hand away with a loud smack. "Who are you?" He was caught off guard and fell to the ground. He looked up blankly and saw Yun Shur looking at him coldly. She said coldly, "I'm not your mommy." "Mom, don't call me mommy." Yun Shur's face suddenly became fierce. She said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Chapter 33:68. Boo-hoo. Yu finally broke down. He threw himself at her and hug her waist as tears streamed down his face. I'm Yu, Mommy. How can you not recognize Yu? Mommy, I'm Yu. I told you that you've got the wrong person. Yin Sure pushed him away forcefully. Yu lost his balance and fell backward, falling into the abyss. Ah, Yu cried in despair. Don't leave me behind. Don't leave me behind. When he woke up, the sky was overcast with dark clouds. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Yu stood on the gloomy grassland. He walked slowly and looked at the endless grassland. His body went limp and he knelt on the ground weakly. The woman's voice sounded again. Who are you? Yu looked up tiredly. When he opened his eyes, the dark clouds were overcast, just like his gloomy inner world. Who am I? He opened his dry lips and muttered to himself. Who am I? He couldn't remember. He only felt that he had an exhausting dream. When he woke up, he didn't know where he was or where he was. What's your name? The woman's voice was persuasive. What's your name? Yu opened his eyes wide in a daze. He muttered to himself in despair. What's my name? What did you see? Yu looked around and shook his head. I don't know. The grass on the grassland started to wither. In an instant, it started to rain heavily. In the rain, he struggled to open his eyes. He allowed the rainwater to pour into his eyes. It was bitter and painful. In the rain, an unfamiliar man walked over. He stood in front of him and bowed slightly. Yu looked at him in confusion, but did not react. Do you know him? No. Yu shook his head. Who is he? He's from the Mu family. The Mu family, his name is Muyaja. Yu muttered the name silently, but an unknown and unfamiliar feeling welled up in her heart. Do you hate him? Yu rubbed his eyes, and tears fell. He did not know why he was crying. Hearing the woman's voice, he muttered doubtfully, Should I hate him? The man's figure gradually disappeared. In an instant, the world around him changed. Yu stood up. As far as his eyes could see, there was endless darkness. Below him was boiling hot lava, and in the middle of it were piles of white bones. The eerie fear invaded his heart. Do you remember your name? I don't know. Yu shook his head. I don't know anything. Then what do you know? Yu started to tremble. She tightened her shoulders and shivered. I only know that I'm alone. He was alone. He was alone. You're not alone. Yu looked up in disbelief. You have a name. I have a name. He stood up and complained. Liar. I don't have a name. I don't have a name. You have a name. The woman's voice said slowly. Your name is... Accompanied by a hoarse gasp, in the darkness, a pair of frightened eyes suddenly opened. A beam of moonlight reflected into the eyes, and the pupils suddenly contracted violently. The incandescent lamp above his head kept swaying, but the surroundings were pitch black. Under the dim light, the lonely shadow pulled at one's heart, and it was suffocating. Chapter 3369. He was so tired. It was as if he was sitting in a deep nightmare. In his muddle-headed state, he dreamed of many strangers. The child stood up. His body swayed slightly as he looked around. In the medical center, people were walking back and forth. The cold light shone on his body, but he couldn't feel any warmth. He was wearing a snow-white hospital gown. The front of his gown was slightly open, and it was covered with thin sheets to detect his heartbeat and pulse. Alice walked over and smiled at him. Fan, you're awake? He sat up slowly and held his forehead. He said tiredly, I seem to have had a very long nightmare. Alice smiled. Nightmare? What kind of nightmare was it? His gaze was slightly dazed, and he smiled. Someone called my name, but that's not my name. Oh, you. He said these two words numbly, and his expression was blank. He heard someone calling his name. You. The funny thing was, he even dreamed of a woman. He kept chasing after the woman's back view, but the woman didn't turn back. He had already forgotten the face of the woman in his dream. He couldn't remember it clearly. Alice was stunned. She thought to herself that he had already gone through deep hypnosis, and many of his memories had already been sealed. However, the name, Yu, was still deeply etched in his mind. It seemed that it would take some time to completely seal his memories. Alice hugged him gently and said gently, Gong Fan, it's just a nightmare. When you wake up, just forget about it. When Gong Xiaoying walked in, Yu was lying on the operating table in a deep coma. He had just gone through the 6th level of hypnosis. His young face was drenched in cold sweat, and his eyelids were trembling violently. Suddenly, a line of tears slowly flowed down and wet his sideburns. Gong Xiaoying walked over and looked at him. Even though he was in a deep coma, the weakness and helplessness on his face were very obvious. To him, this might be a nightmare. However, in fact, his memories were being sealed bit by bit in the depths of his mind. Usually, there weren't many opportunities to use this method. Most of the time, only when some mercenaries retired, Alice would choose to seal all their memories related to the Hurricane Group before letting them go. However, mercenaries from the Hurricane Group would choose to retire in a very small number of cases. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Have his memories been sealed? We still need to observe him carefully." Alice sighed. This is an extremely painful process. Gong Xiaoying suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he suddenly asked, "How painful is it?" This child is extremely attached to memories related to Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja. He was very resistant at first, so the first attempt at hypnosis failed. Failed, Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully. This word rarely comes out of your mouth. Alice looked up and said helplessly, "He's very resistant to the new name Gong Fan. I rehearsed new memories for him, but he didn't accept it. He was very resistant. It was only until the 3rd level of hypnosis that he barely succeeded." As an experienced hypnotist, Alice could replace those old memories with new ones if she used advanced hypnosis skills. Chapter 3370. Gong Xiaoying gave him the name Gong Fan. Alice hypnotized him into a dream. In the dream, she guided him patiently and led him to accept new memories. She instilled in him that his name was Gong Fan, the eldest son of the 3rd generation of the Gong family. He grew up in the Gong family and was the core person in charge of the Davai project. He was also one of the candidates to inherit the Hurricane Group in the future. She also instilled hatred for the Mu family in him. Now, he was already at the 5th level of hypnosis. If there were no accidents, after the 10th level of hypnosis, he would completely forget those memories. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Will he still remember those memories in the future?" He was more concerned about this. Alice shook her head. Memories can never be erased. They can only be sealed. However, it will be very difficult to recall them if they are deeply sealed. Gong Xiaoying's heart calmed down slightly. He lowered his head and looked at Yu Yu's sweaty face. However, he heard Alice say worriedly, "This child has 2 personalities." Dual personality? Yes. Alice said, "One is innocent, and the other is dark." Dual personality meant that a person had 2 relatively independent and separate personalities. It was a relatively serious psychological disorder. Generally speaking, a normal person would have 2 or more ways of thinking at the same time. Human nature itself carried an evil side. The evil side was usually accompanied by strong desire and ambition. The 2 personalities had independent memories and usually did not interfere with each other. However, Yu had a dual personality. This surprised her a little. The innocent side was his true side and also his initial personality. The dark side came from the dark scenes of his childhood. It was influenced by his ears and eyes, so the second personality was split. However, this second personality had always been suppressed by the innocent side and was rarely stimulated. Yu wanted to protect Yun Shishir. He did not hold back, rely on, and yearn for his mother. Therefore, the innocent and kind side had always been suppressed by the second personality. It would only be separated under special circumstances. Alice entered Yu's memories and discovered this personality. She also discovered all the dark memories in this personality. These memories did not interfere with the memories of the original personality. However, after Alice sealed the memories of Yun Shishir and erased the memories of Mu Yaja, Xiao Yichen, and Yue Yao, the original personality quickly disappeared. The second personality took over his body and completely took over his body. Alice said calmly, "His original personality has completely disappeared." She was a little annoyed. In the dream, Yu struggled fiercely. She kept setting up desperate and miserable dreams for him in order to seal those memories. However, what was left behind was a child who looked like a walking corpse. Gong Xiaoying remained silent. He turned around and asked slowly, "Is there a preliminary treatment plan for his heart problem?" "No," Alice said. "It will take a long time to set up a treatment plan. After all, I don't know enough about his condition." "Do it as soon as possible." "Understood." Alice returned to the operating table and gently placed her right hand on his forehead. Fine cold sweat quickly soaked her palm. "No." Chapter 3371. No. In his dream, he was running frantically on the surface of the sea. He kept looking behind him and saw a child who looked exactly like him walking towards him. The child looked at him coldly. His eyes were cold and gloomy on his handsome face. He was dressed in pitch-black clothes, as if he had become one with the night. He looked exactly like him. However, on his palm-sized face, his black hair was sharp and his eyes were deep. His thin lips were pursed tightly and his eyes were cold. "It's useless." The young man in black's voice was cold and indifferent. It was as cold as a piano on the sea. He walked slowly on the sea. He was calm and elegant. Even when the black waves hit him, he didn't move an inch. Even though Yu was running pathetically, he couldn't shake him off no matter how hard he tried. "You can't escape." "No, don't come over." Yu ran forward like a madman. Beneath his feet was a dark sea. Through the shallow water, he seemed to see an endless abyss at the bottom of the sea. It was as if it was going to swallow him whole. Sharks swam around while wagging their tails. They opened their mouths from time to time, revealing their bloody mouths. Rubbing his eyes, Yu stepped on the seawater and ran toward the sea surface not far away. "Save me, save me." He looked back from time to time, but the young man in black was getting closer and closer to him. He exclaimed and ran. However, in the blink of an eye, the young man's figure flashed and appeared in front of him. He was caught off guard and bumped into the young man. Yu was hit hard by the inertia, and his body leaned backward. The young man in black held his hand tightly and pulled him in front of him. He held his shoulders. Yu finally saw his face clearly. He had a fair face and a pair of dark eyes that hid traces of scarlet. He had a high-nosed bridge and thin lips. When he smiled, he revealed his white teeth. "Where are you going?" Yu asked cautiously. Who are you?" "Who am I?" The black-clothed youth tilted his head, his voice as cold as ice. "I am you." "You are lying." Yu shook her head. "What are you trying to do?" "I've had enough of you." The black-clothed youth sneered arrogantly. "You, from today onwards, let me replace you. And you are not worthy of existence." "What?" The black-clothed youth tightly gripped his shoulder and pulled him into his embrace. He used so much strength that it was as if he wanted to fuse into his own flesh and blood. "Let's become one. Let me replace you." Yu struggled incessantly. However, the difference in strength was too great. He could only feel his body gradually turning into smoke and fusing with the black-clothed youth's body. "No!" Yu's eyes were filled with tears. Don't be afraid." The black-clothed youth smiled coldly and grabbed the back of his neck. As he lowered his head, his cold eyes slightly opened, revealing a sharp edge. "From now on, I am you, and you will be reduced to ashes." "No, Yu." Yin Shir was so shocked that she sat up on the bed. She had woken up from a nightmare and was covered in cold sweat. She looked around. In the dark bedroom, Xiao Yiqin was sleeping beside her. He was frowning slightly, but did not wake up. Only then did she realize that she had just had a nightmare. Chapter 3372. Yu. Yin Shir lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She hurriedly took out her car keys and left the house. She walked to the garage and sat in the driver's seat. She started the car with trembling hands and slowly drove out of the garage. When Xiao Yiqin woke up, it was already midnight. He instinctively reached out, but the side of the bed was empty. "Mommy?" He instantly woke up. He sat up and called out, "Mommy?" There was no response in the empty room. Xiao Yiqin immediately got out of bed and walked to the living room. He did not see Yin Shir. Muyaja leaned against the sofa. He was exhausted from the night of searching. He walked over and gently pushed his shoulder. "Daddy?" Muyaja was not in a deep sleep. When he woke up, he opened his eyes and saw that it was his father. What's wrong? Mommy is missing. What? Muyaja took his jacket and walked into the garage. He realized that the Mercedes-Benz was gone. It had probably been driven away. Xiao Yiqin asked anxiously, "Where did Mommy go?" "I know where she went." Muyaja bowed and said, "Get in the car." "Okay." The father and son got into the car and drove toward the harbor. For the past 3 days, Gong Jie had deployed more than 10 patrol boats to carry out a large-scale salvage operation. The area where Yu Yu had gone missing was getting smaller and smaller. However, the area where Yu Yu had gone missing was expanded to 10 nautical miles. Not a single corner was missed. A large-scale search was carried out, but there was still no news. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. Dozens of underwater robots dove a few thousand meters into the sea to investigate, but they still could not find any clues. However, even though the cost of salvaging alone was a few million USD per day, no one said that they would give up. No news was the best news so far. However, as time passed, Gong Jie's faith was gradually eroded. The golden rescue time was within 72 hours. 72 hours were about to pass. This meant that Yu Yu's chances of survival were very slim. However, if he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. He would not give up. The car arrived at the port. Muyaja got out of the car and walked to the port. The huge port was noisy. He suddenly thought of a place. He picked up Xiao Yiqin and ran towards the beach. At dawn, the horizon shimmered faintly. Muyaja walked to the seaside and saw Yun Shirshir standing by the seaside. She was staring at the sea, motionless. When Xiao Yiqin saw this, he turned pale with fright. He struggled to jump out of Muyaja's arms and ran over to Yun Shirshir, hugging her tightly from behind. "Mommy!" He looked up and saw that Yun Shirshir had been staring at the sea since the beginning. Her eyes were red and swollen, and they were filled with despair and numbness. Xiao Yiqin calmed down slightly. He walked in front of Yun Shirshir and held her hand tightly. He comforted her and said, "Mommy, don't worry. You will be fine." She had not closed her eyes for 2 days and 2 nights. She was in a daze. Muyaja coaxed and lied to her. He sent her home to rest, but she dreamed that Yu Yu was swallowed by the sea. She woke up with a start. Yun Shirshir clenched her fists tightly. She suppressed her emotions and said in a trembling voice, "Is there still no news of Yu Yu?" Chapter 3373. Xiao Yiqin quickly comforted her. "Mommy, don't let your imagination run wild. Didn't uncles say that they haven't found him yet? This means that Yu Yu is still alive." Yin Shirshir took a deep breath and slowly squatted on the ground. She wrapped her arms around her knees and said in despair, "Xiao Yiqin, Yu Yu has fallen into the sea. Even if we send more people to search for him day and night, it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack. The sea is so big and the depth is a few thousand meters. 72 hours have passed. Do you think that Yu Yu will be safe and sound? Will he really be okay?" Xiao Yiqin was silent for a moment. Even he couldn't guarantee that Yu Yu would be okay. But he had been waiting for a miracle. Yun Shirshir held her forehead in despair and said, "For the past 3 days, I've been lying to myself. Yu Yu will be fine. Yu Yu will be safe. But I can't lie to myself anymore." She finally broke down and knelt on the ground. Tears flowed out of her eyes and down her cheeks. She cried pitifully, "It's my fault. It's all my fault. No matter what he said back then, I shouldn't have let go of his hand." Little Yiqin reached out and hugged her tightly as he burst into tears. "Mommy, don't scare me, okay?" He didn't know what to do. The news of Yu Yu's disappearance was like the end of the world to him. But he held on and didn't dare to break down easily because he still had to take care of his mother and sister. If he couldn't recover, what would happen to his mother? Yin Shirshir felt the same way. She had been deceiving herself and others, believing that Yu Yu would be safe and sound. No one dared to give up easily. She knew that if she broke down, it would be twice as painful for Xiao Yiqin and Muyaja. Gu Xing's departure had been a huge blow to her. During that period of time, Muyaja watched over her day and night, afraid that something would happen to her. Yu Yu and Xiao Yiqin stayed by her side. She didn't want to relive those days. However, she was barely holding on because she believed that Yu would be fine. However, 3 days had passed. Every minute and every second was torture, incomparable torture. She closed her eyes, but the nightmares continued. She began to be afraid of closing her eyes. She was afraid that if she woke up, she would be waiting for bad news, waiting for the end of the world. Xiaoqin hugged her and suddenly said, "Mommy, I believe that you will be alive and well. We can't live without him, and he can't live without us." Back then, Yin Na and Li Qin were thrown into the sea by Li Dongxiang, but they didn't die in the end. Gong Jie said that he had sent as many people as he could to search for them. They didn't even let go of a few thousand meters under the sea. He swore that if anything were to happen to Yu, even if he were to die, he would definitely be able to find his corpse. However, there was no news for a few days. Gong Jie suspected that Yu was no longer in this area. There were a few islands near that area. He had already sent patrol boats to investigate. If there was any news, they would definitely be able to find Yu's whereabouts. Muyaja looked at the backs of the mother and son, who were leaning against each other. He suddenly loosened his clenched fists and slowly walked behind Yin Shishir. His heart ached as he hugged her shoulders. "It's okay." Chapter 3374. He said firmly, "The little guy is so lucky. He'll be fine." Yin Shishir gripped the back of his hand tightly. She used so much force that she almost broke his skin. He knew that she was enduring it. The fact that there was no news of Yu was like the sky falling down on her. Muyaja hugged her tenderly and kissed her forehead gently. He said gently, Sure, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home. Wait for Yu to come home." These words had undoubtedly touched her deeply. Big drops of tears rolled down her cheeks. Little Chin wiped away his tears at once and gave a solemn smile. "Yes, Mommy, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home." Muyaja coaxed her gently. "So be good and stay at home and wait for Yu to come home, okay?" Yin Shishir's lips trembled violently. She looked up and widened her eyes. Choking, she said, "No matter how long it takes, I'm willing to wait. But will he come back to us?" "Why not?" Muyaja hugged her tightly. His voice was slightly hoarse as he said, "That guy is so clingy to you and likes to pester you. It's as if it's killing him to be away from you for a day. He always likes to chase after you. Mommy this and mommy that. How can he not want you? How can he not come home?" Little Chin added, "That's right. You can't leave Mommy even if he leaves the air. He'll definitely come back. Otherwise, where else can he go?" Yin Shishir couldn't stop her tears anymore. She nodded pathetically. Ever since Yu was born, he had been like her little tail that she couldn't shake off no matter how hard she tried. She recalled how the little guy was extremely unwilling to spend time with Muyaja. He hugged her and said coquettishly, "Mommy, you belong to Yu alone. Yu doesn't want Daddy. Yu only wants Mommy." She still remembered when she brought him to Fairy Tale Valley to play. Even though she couldn't participate in many of the activities, she still smiled brightly. Back at the hospital, when she treated Xiaoqin slightly better, he would make things difficult for her unwillingly. Until she said seriously, You know what? Mommy doesn't belong to you alone." At that moment, Yu's eyes reddened. How could he not know that she also had feelings and free will? However, only the heavens knew how much mental work he had done before he let go and accepted Muyaja and Xiaoqin. He had always been stingy and unwilling to share his mother's love with anyone else. However, he accepted Xiaoqin and Muyaja from the bottom of his heart. "No matter what choice Mommy makes, I will definitely be by Mommy's side. Because Yu can't live without Mommy, and Mommy can't live without Yu either." Since the beginning of his life, they had depended on each other for survival. She was the brightest dawn in his life and the warmth that he couldn't bear to part with. Yu's love for Xiaoqin and Muyaja was mostly because he loved them both. When they got home, Muyaja carried Yin Shishir to the bed and lay down beside her. He hugged her gently and said calmly, "Rest well. Don't let your thoughts run wild." Yin Shishir suddenly turned around and threw herself into his arms. She hugged him tightly and greedily absorbed the warmth from his body. "Don't leave me." The man's lips curled into a smile. Yes, I'll stay with you. I won't go anywhere. Chapter 33:75. He hugged her for a long time before he slowly fell asleep. However, Xiao Qin was no longer sleepy. He pushed open the bedroom door and was greeted with a cold and empty room. He turned on the lights, and the room instantly lit up. He walked to the bed and sat on his side. This bed was his and Yu Yu's bed. Ever since they moved here, they had been sleeping on the same bed. He was the one who suggested it. At first, Yu Yu was very against it. However, he met such a clingy older brother and insisted on sleeping with him, saying that he was afraid of the dark. He still remembered how Yu Yu drew a line on the bed and said arrogantly, "You're not allowed to cross the line. Do you understand? If you cross the line, I understand." He lay down on the bed and pointed at the line. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, "I'm not allowed to cross the line, right? I understand." However, no matter how well he planned it, every time he slept in the middle of the night, he would find himself in all sorts of weird positions and squeezed to Yu Yu's side. Sometimes his calf would be on his stomach. Sometimes his arm would be on his chest. Sometimes he would feel cold in his sleep, and he couldn't help but hug Yu Yu. Yu Yu couldn't sleep well because of him and would throw a tantrum at him the next day. However, he gradually got used to it. Xiao Qin's sleeping posture was naturally terrible. No matter how much he warned himself before he slept that he had to lie upright and not move around, he knew that his sleeping posture must be terrible when he saw Yu Yu's ashen face when he woke up. However, as time passed, the relationship got better. Yu Yu was arrogant on the surface, but many mornings when he woke up, he would find Yu Yu hugging him gently and sleeping quietly. What was even more incredible was that as long as Yu Yu hugged him, he would be like a gentle kitten and wouldn't move around. The feeling of being hugged by him was very warm. Therefore, even though he was very sleepy, he could not bear to break this warmth. But now the bed was empty. The spot where Yu Yu slept was cold and cheerless. He sat on the bed for a long time before he suddenly opened his palm. 2 amethysts lay quietly in his palm. It was the amulet that Yu Yu had secretly stuffed into his hand before they left. "Xiao Qin, you have to be well." In his hazy state, he heard Yu Yu whisper into his ear. Unknowingly, her eyes became slightly moist again. Xiao Qin wiped the corners of his eyes sadly and looked up at the ceiling. He wanted to force his tears back, but even so, they still flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. "Don't cry." He gently pressed his index finger against his lips and muttered, "Don't cry. Don't cry." Tears welled up in his eyes. He bit his lip hard and kept warning himself, "Mui Chen, you can't cry. Mui Chen." Yu Yu's angry voice suddenly came from behind him. "Useless. You only know how to cry." Xiao Qin was shocked. He turned around, but there was no one behind him. He bit his index finger as tears flowed out of his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He lowered his head and looked at the 2 amethysts. Suddenly, he clenched them tightly and walked to the desk. He took a tool and carefully connected the 2 amethysts with a red string. Chapter 33:76. He rubbed the pendant gently with his fingers and muttered to himself sadly, "Yu Yu, when are you coming home? Don't tell me you don't want to go home. Am I always making you angry? I promise I won't do it again. I won't tease you on purpose or make you unhappy anymore." Xiao Qin pursed his lips and said, "The important thing is, when are you coming home?" He returned to the bed and lay down quietly. Looking at the empty space beside him, he reached out his arms in a daze, imagining Yu Yu lying beside him. He wanted to hug him, but his arms grabbed nothing. Xiao Qin's nose stung again. He gritted his teeth, clutched the blanket tightly, and let out a helpless whimper. He had a long and heavy dream, and it was so oppressive that he almost couldn't breathe. In the dream, the entire sky was gray and overcast with dark clouds. It gave off a very heavy feeling, and there was a strong aura of destruction. He looked around blankly and saw that he was standing on a withered sea. The seawater beneath his feet was rotten as if it had been soaked in ink. He tried to take a step forward and was actually able to stand firmly on the surface of the sea without falling. He suddenly realized that he was in a dream. Usually, when he was in a dream, no matter how bizarre it was, he would not realize that he was in a dream. But now, his consciousness was exceptionally clear. Mui Chin walked on the surface of the sea in a daze. The waves hit his body, but he didn't feel any pain. He didn't know when he would wake up from this dream. A youth in black stood in the distance with his back facing him. He looked lonely and cold. Mui Chin walked over in confusion and asked hesitantly, "Who are you?" The youth in black had his back facing him and didn't say a word, as if he didn't hear him. Mui Chin walked closer and raised his voice slightly. "Who are you?" The youth in black finally reacted, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he walked forward. Mui Chin suddenly felt strange and quickened his pace to catch up with him. The black-clothed youth walked casually, as if he was taking a stroll in a garden. Mui Chin chased after him until he was out of breath. From time to time, waves would hit him, hindering his footsteps. "Wait!" The young man gave him an extremely familiar feeling. Mui Chin quickened his pace and finally caught up with her. He said, "Wait." The black-clothed youth seemed to have finally heard his words. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, but his back was still facing him. Mui Chin stopped in his tracks and panted for a moment. He stretched out his hand and gently clasped his shoulder. "Who are you?" Just as her hand touched his shoulder, she felt a gust of cold air pressing against her. He couldn't help but retract his hand, but he saw the black-clothed youth turn his head slightly, and a handsome and familiar face immediately entered his eyes. "Yu." Mui Chin became nervous. "Yu, why are you here?" The black-clothed youth turned slightly and looked back at him. His empty and dark eyes seemed to be puzzled. "Yu?" This name seemed extremely unfamiliar. The black-clothed youth repeated it silently and sneered. "Who's Yu?" Mui Chin's heart clenched tightly. "Yu, don't you recognize me? I'm your brother." The black-clothed youth sized him up coldly, and his lips curved into a thin smile. "Brother?" Chapter 33:77. Big Brother. His voice was as cold as ice, devoid of any warmth. Xiao Qin suddenly felt that the young man in front of him was extremely unfamiliar. Even though his facial features and eyes were exactly the same as Yu's, his cold, affectionate gaze and empty eyes without any warmth or focus made him feel like a stranger. He seemed to be very different from the gentle and cute Yu in his memory. Even though Yu would occasionally show a cold expression, it was definitely not this kind of coldness. It was as if the coldness came from his bones. It made him shudder. Mui Chin looked at him with concern and said in a trembling voice, "Have you forgotten who I am? I'm your brother, Mui Chin." "Let go." The young man's voice was cold and had a hint of hostility that was hard to ignore. Mui Chin hugged his shoulders in heartache. Hot tears kept falling from the corners of his eyes onto the young man's thin shoulders. "Yu, what's wrong with you? Are you really Yu? Why can't you recognize me? How can you not remember your brother?" The youth remained indifferent to his helplessness and tears. His eyes stared blankly in the direction of the sea, not paying too much attention to him. Xiao Qin looked up and held his face. He asked anxiously, "Where are you? Why didn't you come back? Mommy, Daddy, little sister, and I are waiting for you to come home. When are you coming home?" The young man's cold eyes closed indifferently, and then opened again indifferently. His pitch-black pupils were like an abyss, without any focus. He could not even see his own reflection in his eyes. "Yu." Xiao Qin hugged him tightly and refused to let go. "Yu, can you not scare me? Take a good look at me. Can't you recognize me?" Hearing this, the young man pushed him away coldly and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "You've got the wrong person." After saying that, he turned around and walked away slowly. Xiao Qin saw this and quickly chased after him. He reached out to grab his arm, but the young man waved him away expressionlessly. "Don't follow me anymore." Xiao Qin's body fell to the surface of the sea. The seawater splashed up and surrounded him, but he struggled to get up and chased after him. "Yu." He used all his strength to catch up to him. In a flash, he was in front of him and picked up the pendant around his neck. The two amethysts were reflected in the young man's of light. The young man was attracted by the pendant, and his eyes became somewhat focused. "You really don't remember?" Little Li Chen displayed the pendant and lamented bitterly. "This is the amulet you gave me. I have the exact same purple crystal bracelet that I gave you as a gift." You said you liked it very much and would never leave it. You wore it all the time. You didn't even want to take it off when you were bathing. To protect me, you accidentally broke this bracelet. You blamed yourself and felt sorry for it. You risked your life to find these amethysts. Before we left, you gave it to me as an amulet. You, do you really not remember? Have you really forgotten? The young man was silent for a long time. He looked at the pendant and felt that it was unfamiliar. He looked up at him again and said coldly, "Get lost." He pushed Xiao Yichen away. Behind the young man, a stormy sea that was dozens of meters high suddenly rose and covered him. Chapter 33:78. Xiao Yichen held his breath in shock. In the next second, the waves hit him and pushed him deep into the sea. Xiao Yichen opened his mouth, and the salty seawater flowed into his mouth continuously. For a moment, he felt suffocated and had difficulty breathing. It was so real that it didn't feel like a dream at all. It felt so real that it really happened. He opened his eyes and saw the young man gracefully stepping on the water and leaving calmly. He opened his mouth and wanted to call his name, but all he could do was drink a few mouthfuls of bitter seawater. On the bed, Xiao Yichen suddenly opened his eyes. His eyelashes were wet with tears, and they kept rolling down from the corners of his eyes. It was a dream. He had an exhausting nightmare. Outside the window, the sun had already risen. The first rays of the morning sun shone on the back garden, and it was full of vitality. He sat up in shock and looked around. In the empty room and on the balcony, he could vaguely see a figure's back. The child was wearing a white shirt and standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Through the clear glass, he could see the garden full of Chinese roses. Mu Yichen looked at the figure's back and clenched his fists nervously. His back stiffened, and he gently got off the bed and walked to his side. When his eyes regained focus, he finally recognized that the person in front of him was Yu. He opened his mouth in shock and only managed to say one word. "You, chill." Yu pretended to be mysterious and covered his mouth. He turned around and opened his eyes that were as bright as the stars. His distinct eyelashes made his eyes look watery and beautiful. Mu Yichen, look. Mu Yichen looked in the direction he was pointing at and saw the garden full of Chinese roses in full bloom. "It's so beautiful." Yu smiled and said, "Mu Yichen, I have to go. When I'm not around, you must take good care of Mommy and Yao." "Yes, and that stinky daddy." Mu Yichen widened his eyes in shock. "Leave." Yu placed her hands behind her back obediently. She turned around and looked at him with a bright smile. "You have to take care of yourself when I'm not around." Yu. Mu Yichen nervously reached out to grab his sleeve. "Where are you going?" His hand grabbed nothing but air. He looked down at his hand and tried to touch him again, only to find that his hand had passed through his body. His body was gradually becoming transparent. It was as if he had become immortal. Mu Yichen was so shocked that he took half a step back. He stared at the scene before him in disbelief. Yu suddenly opened her arms and threw herself into his embrace. She sobbed. Xiao Yichen instinctively wanted to protect him, but his hands went through his body again. He was so scared that his whole body started to tremble. "Yu, where are you going?" Mu Yichen finally couldn't control his emotions and broke down crying. "Yu, don't go." Yu looked up and only smiled. Gradually, her body became more and more transparent and slowly disappeared from his embrace. Yu. Mu Yichen woke up again and sat up in bed in shock. It was only when he opened his eyes and saw the glaring sunlight outside the window that he realized that it wasn't real. It was a dream within a dream. Chapter 33:79. Xiao Yichen's gaze fell on the pendant around his neck. He gently lifted the pendant and rubbed it with his fingers. Perhaps it was because it had been attached to his skin for a long time, but it was not as cold as it seemed. He got up and went to the shower room to take a shower. He had a nightmare and was covered in cold sweat. He took a hot shower and changed into a clean set of clothes. After washing up, he walked to the baby's room. In the crib, little Yao was playing with a toy. Xiao Yichen walked over curiously and leaned against the railing as he watched her in a daze. Usually, Yu liked to lie beside the crib and watch little Yao play with her toys. Yao was still so young, so the toys she liked were also very childish. Sometimes, Even if it was a doll that couldn't make a sound, sing, or move, she would still hold it in her hands and play with it with relish. Children's interests were often so simple and cute. Toys that were particularly boring in the eyes of adults were treasures in the eyes of children. However, Yu did not feel impatient. Instead, she was very patient and did not seem to get tired of looking at them. Little Yuyao's favorite toy was a rainbow pony that Yu had given her. Usually, she liked to hug it to sleep. When she woke up, she would still hug it and never leave its side. The rainbow pony was snow white, and only its tail was rainbow-colored. Therefore, it was inevitable that it would get dirty if she kept playing with it. The nanny wanted to wash it, but little Yao refused to let go and refused to give it to her. She even cried and threw a tantrum. In the end, Yu thought of a way to trick the little girl. She personally washed the rainbow pony, disinfected it, and carefully ironed its tail. The most unique thing about this rainbow pony was its tail. It was a real ponytail. Therefore, it was a limited edition Leisure mascot. Little Yao loved it so much that she could not put it down. Little Yao was playing happily. When she looked up and saw Xiaoyi Chen, she turned her face away arrogantly and ignored him. Her arrogant attitude was exactly the same as Yu's. He didn't think so before. But looking at it now, wasn't it a replica of Yu? Back then, when Yu had faced him, she had also given him the cold shoulder. She was arrogant, proud, and sharp-tongued, but deep down, she was extremely gentle. Little Yao suddenly noticed something. Her gaze landed on the pendant around Xiao Yichen's neck. She stared at the two amethysts, and her beautiful eyes suddenly curved into crescents as she smiled. He smiled, revealing two sharp teeth that had just emerged from his gums. Bro, she uttered two vague syllables. Xiao Chen was stunned. Yao pointed at the crystal around his neck with an innocent look on her face. Big brother, are you calling Yu? Xiao Chen looked at the little girl in disbelief. His fingers gently caressed the amethyst pendant around his neck, and his eyes lit up. Yao, say it again. Bro. Yao clapped her hands excitedly, and her tender but moved around on the bed. Then, she flipped over and climbed to the railing. Her two small hands gripped the railing tightly, and her pair of chubby little legs squatted on the bed like a little frog. Then, she slowly used her body to climb up the railing. Even though her legs were trembling badly, she still managed to climb up steadily. Chapter 3380. Brother. Xiao Chen heard her clearly and was instantly overjoyed. He immediately picked up Yao and hugged her happily. Then, he gently rubbed his face against hers. Yao, you must have recognized that this belongs to Yu, right? Little Yao lay in his arms. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she sized up the amethyst necklace and fiddled with it with her hands. A child's memory was very limited. The things that she could remember were very limited. However, Yao was a very intelligent child. When Yu was around, he liked to accompany her the most. Therefore, she was very familiar with Yu. Sometimes, whenever Yao was awake, Yu would push open the door and enter. Yao could hear his footsteps and could acutely identify who it was. Sometimes, when she smelled the fragrance on Yu's body, she would excitedly kick her legs. Yao could not speak yet, and her ability to think was limited. Therefore, it was very difficult to say who Yao liked the most. There were many different opinions. Everyone thought that Yao liked them the most. However, in reality, Yao was the most excited when Yu was near her. Yao was very familiar with Yu. Therefore, when she saw the amethyst necklace on Xiao Chen's neck, the little girl was very smart. She immediately knew that it belonged to Yu and danced with joy. However, she seemed to have mistaken Xiao Chen for Yu. After all, the two children looked very similar. In addition, Yao was so small. Therefore, the little girl originally ignored Xiao Chen. However, when she saw the necklace on his neck, she became excited. Bro, carrot. Xiao Chen couldn't help but tear up. He hugged Yao tightly. He had just woken up from a nightmare and was exhausted, but because of her words, he finally couldn't hold back his tears. Bro, Little Yue Yao didn't understand his tears. He fiddled with the amethyst with great interest, as if he couldn't bear to part with it. She didn't understand Mu Yichen's grief and heartache, and she couldn't read his tears either. She was completely attracted to the purple crystal. Seeing how much she liked it, Xiao Yichen returned to his room and took the purple crystal apart. There were 2 of them in total, so he made 2 of them. When he returned to the baby's room, he tied the anklet that he had made around the little Yue Yao's ankle. "One for you, one for me." Xiao Yichen fiddled with the amethyst pendant and smiled at her. "But you're not allowed to lose it. This is the amulet you gave us." Little Yue Yao hugged her ankle. For a moment, she lost her balance and fell on the bed. Xiao Yichen was amused. As he laughed, his tears dried up unknowingly. The little guy finally knew how to speak, but the first word he learned was not daddy or mommy, but brother. This made him not know whether to laugh or cry. If Yu were here, he would be beaming with joy, right? Even in his dreams, he wanted to hear little Yue Yao call him brother. However, he did not mention it to Yin Shishir, as he was worried that his mommy would think of him when she saw it. The salvage work was still going on in an orderly manner. Gong Jie deployed 2 more patrol boats. The lineup was so huge that it almost affected the sea route hub. However, half a month had passed, and there was still no news of the baby. Chapter 3381. Yin Shishir was not willing to give up even the slightest chance. Apart from sleeping, she spent most of her time on the ship waiting for news. However, half a month had passed, and there was still no news. Even so, no one said that they wanted to give up. Xiao Yichen firmly believed that Yu was definitely still alive. Perhaps it was because of the special telepathy between the twins. Sometimes he would dream. In his dreams, he would often see Yu. However, Yu had become more and more unfamiliar to him. His back was always facing him. No matter how much Xiao Yichen shouted his name, he remained indifferent. It was as if there was an invisible wall between them, and he could not hear his voice. However, Xiao Yichen firmly believed that Yu was definitely still alive. He told Yin Shishir about this dream, and Yin Shishir also thought that it was magical. Originally, she did not believe in something as bizarre as telepathy. However, this was not the only case. Before this, she had experienced Xiao Yichen's magical telepathy. She realized that between Xiao Yichen and Yu, Xiao Yichen's telepathy was especially sensitive. In the past, even before Xiao Yichen met Yu, he would often dream of Yu. It was as if his soul had floated into Yu's body, and he could clearly sense all of Yu's senses. He had once mentioned something to Yin Shishir. That was, Yu once had a fever. He was dizzy and lay in bed in a daze. Xiao Yichen said that he had a dream that time. He dreamed that he was lying in bed, and a gentle woman was sitting by the bed, feeding him medicine. That feeling was so real and clear. It was as if he had a fever. When he woke up, he was sweating all over, as if he had just experienced a nightmare. Yu had forgotten about this incident, but Xiao Yichen remembered it clearly. In addition, he often felt angina. After a checkup, all his physical indicators were very healthy, even surpassing the excellent indicators of children his age. His physical fitness was extremely strong. However, it was an undeniable fact that he was suffering from angina. Sometimes, when the pain was too much, he would clutch his chest and freeze on the bed, not daring to move. He was such a painful child, but he broke out in a cold sweat from the torture of angina. Muyaja couldn't figure out the reason, but even the most authoritative experts couldn't explain the cause. However, Yu did not sense it so clearly. Compared to Little Yichen, he was a little slow in this aspect. However, Xiao Yichen wasn't the only exception among the Geminis. All over the world, many Geminis had a mysterious telepathy with each other. However, Xiao Yichen's was especially strong. Hence, when Xiao Yichen told Yin Shishir about this dream, she, who was originally depressed, was suddenly filled with hope when she heard this. She also firmly believed that Yu would be fine. Before Yu fell into the sea, news came from the hospital that something had happened to Mushi. When Mushi found out that Yu was in trouble, she felt guilty and knelt outside the villa for a day and a night, hoping to get Yin Shishir's forgiveness. However, Yun sure avoided her. She couldn't forgive her. However, she knew Mushi's unspeakable difficulties. Even so, she still couldn't forgive her. Chapter 3382. To be fair, Yun sure treated her assistant well. To her, the latter was not just an ordinary assistant, but a friend. She even invited her to be her bridesmaid at her wedding. This meant that, to Yun sure, Mushi was as important as a family member. However, the assistant betrayed her. This was what she could not forgive the most. She trusted her wholeheartedly and did not doubt her words at all. Whatever the assistant said was the truth. She rarely trusted someone so much, and that was because the assistant was Qin Zhou's subordinate. However, the assistant's betrayal was truly heartbreaking. When Qin Zhou found out about this, he was furious. He even thought of punishing the assistant harshly. However, he was busy taking care of Yun sure at that time, and could not find the time. The assistant had always wanted to see Yun sure. Whether she forgave her or not, she had to at least apologize to her face-to-face. She begged the manager, but he replied, Sure trusted you so much, yet you betrayed her. Do you still expect her to forgive you? She doesn't even want to see you. Mushi, I'm utterly disappointed in you. I advise you to disappear from Shure's sight. Otherwise, don't force me to take action. The assistant trembled with fear when she heard this. She was not afraid of Qin Zhou taking action, but she was almost crushed by self-reproach. A month after Yu fell into the sea, she slit her wrists at home to commit suicide. However, she was discovered in time and sent to the hospital. Her original intention was very simple, and that was to pay a life for a life. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. She harmed Shure and Yu, so she would use her life to pay for it. Although she understood that her life might not be important to Yun sure, this was the best way she could think of. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only hoped to atone for her sins to the greatest extent. However, her suicide attempt did not succeed. The overflowing water from the bathtub seeped downstairs. The neighbors downstairs called the police and found her committing suicide at home. Hence, she was sent to the hospital in a hurry. After more than 20 hours of emergency treatment, she finally passed the critical stage. When Yun sure found out about this, she felt sorry for her, so she went to the hospital to visit her. Upon seeing her, Mushi's originally disheartened heart was injected with a trace of vitality. She struggled to get off the bed and knelt in front of her with a thud. She cried bitterly, Sure, I'm so sorry. I don't ask for your forgiveness, but other than this, I can't find any other way to apologize. Sure, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She kept kowtowing, and her forehead kept hitting the ground, causing blood to seep out. Yun shure's face was pale. She looked at her, but did not reach out to help her. Her heart had long turned cold, without a trace of warmth. Even though she was crying her heart out, Yun sure still couldn't bring herself to forgive her. I didn't come to see you to listen to this. Yun sure smiled coldly. You feel guilty, don't you? Do you really want to beg for my forgiveness? That's right. Of course, you do, but don't you think that you're being selfish? Mushi looked at her blankly. Chapter 3383. After a pause, she curled her lips helplessly. But that's another matter. I'm very sorry about your parents' deaths. They're innocent, and I implicated them. She clenched her fists and smiled sadly. What's done can't be undone. Mushi, you're on your own now. With that, she left the hospital. Mushi knelt on the ground in a daze, her whole body cold. A few days later, she pulled out the needle for blood transfusion. In the middle of the night, she left a letter and took the drug. She believed in Buddhism, so she believed that people who committed suicide would go to hell. This was her way of returning home, and it was also the most dignified way for herself. Yun sure was not surprised by Mushi's death. She locked the letter in the cupboard and did not open it to read it again. She believed that the fate of all living things in this world was predetermined. Perhaps this was also fate's fetters. Mushi's parents were implicated because of Yu. She could not deny this. However, Yu was also because of Mushi. There was no news of him until now. It seemed that fate was playing tricks on them. Even so, she still believed that Yu was safe and sound. Every day, she would pray sincerely, hoping that one day, when she returned home, she would see Yu with a table full of dishes and wearing a cute teddy bear apron. He would stand at the entrance and give her a gentle hug. "Mommy, you're back." She looked forward to such a day. Yu helped her tidy up the cloakroom in disdain and complained, "Mommy, you really don't have enough clothes. When will I accompany you to shop for clothes?" She looked forward to him carefully opening her door in the middle of the night, sneaking into her room, and folding the bedding for her. Alas, she did not know when this day would come. Little Yao could speak now. From babbling at the beginning, he could call out "Daddy" and "Mommy" clearly. However, even if Xiaoqian didn't specifically mention it, how could she not know that the first word Yao learned when she opened her mouth was brother? That day, Xiaoqian was holding Yao in the baby's room. When Yao hugged him and kept babbling, she stood with her back to the door and covered her mouth tightly. Tears streamed down her face. She heard it. She heard Yao call out "Big Brother." She suddenly recalled the time when Yu ran up to her with Yao in her arms and exclaimed, "Mommy, Yao knows how to call me Big Brother." She still didn't believe it. However, now that he heard it with his own ears, he finally believed it. Yu must have hugged Yao more than once to practice her pronunciation. How great would it be if Yu was here? If he heard it with his own ears, he would definitely be overjoyed, right? Yu, did you hear that? Little sister is calling Big Brother. Ashland Island. A young man dressed in black stood by the seaside. The waves kept coming in wave after wave, submerging his ankles. The sea breeze blew against his face, bringing with it a slight chill. The young man stood on the spot, allowing the sea breeze to hit him. He was wearing a thin black shirt, which kept fluttering in the sea breeze. He gently closed his eyes and slowly opened them again. The sea breeze blew into his eyes, forcing some tears out. On his cold and beautiful face, his gaze was focused. The black diamond earring on his ear was especially eye-catching. Behind him, Lisa carried a trench coat and walked to his side, gently draping it over him. Chapter 3384. Master, the sea breeze is a little strong. I'm worried that you'll catch a cold. The child was indifferent. After Lisa draped it over him, he raised his hand and tightened his collar slightly. However, he continued to stare at the sea in silence. Some time ago, Gong Xiaoying arranged for him to recuperate on this private island. The seaside was warm all year round and was very conducive to recuperation. On one hand, it was to avoid being noticed. Gong Jia often went in and out of the headquarters. If he was left in the Gong family, it was inevitable that news would leak out. On the other hand, it was mainly to recuperate his body. Alice said that recuperation required a relatively quiet environment. Gong Xiaoying thought of this and arranged for Lisa to stay by his side to protect him 24/7. When Lisa found out that she had a new master and came to his side, she was a little surprised. It was him, although his name had changed, and he was no longer Yu, but Gong Fan. His personality seemed to be very different from before. When he woke up, he liked to stand by the sea and gaze at the sea. No matter what she said, he was never stingy with a word of agreement. When he was still called Yu, although he sometimes showed maturity that did not match his age, most of the time, he was still as innocent and naive as a child. However, now that he had become Gong Fan, he had become a person that she could not see through. He did not speak often. At most, he would speak less than 10 sentences a day. He was concise and to the point. However, after spending some time together, they had developed some tacit understanding. Sometimes, she could understand what he meant with just one look. He would only say something once. If she could not hear it clearly, he would not repeat it a second time. When he came to this island, other than cooperating with Alice's treatment, he was very punctual with his 4 meals a day. Every morning at 7 o'clock, he would wake up naturally. When he woke up, he would walk around the beach and then return to the study room to read for the entire morning. After lunch, he would go to the medical center for a checkup. His physical condition was very bad. After a period of recuperation, his various functions had been improved and optimized. Sometimes, when Alice was not on the island, he would enter the laboratory in the afternoon to study quantum transmission. At night, After dinner, he would go to bed early to rest. Lisa knew very well that his silence was not only because he was cold, but also because many of his memories had been sealed away. As a result, his mind sometimes went blank. The only thing that left a deep impression on him was the Heavenly Eye Project. Normally, he would lock himself in the laboratory and constantly check the formulas. Sometimes she would walk in and accidentally see him leaning over the table, breathing lightly. When she saw this, her heart ached a little, but there was nothing she could do. She knew that it was Gong Shaoying's order that Alice sealed his memories. He was arranged to stay on this island, and she dutifully protected him. "Master, the wind is getting stronger. Let's go back," she whispered beside him. Gong Fan didn't say anything. His back didn't move at all. His skin was almost numb from the cold sea wind, but even he himself didn't know what he was waiting for by the seaside so stubbornly. The temperature gradually dropped, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. He suddenly turned around expressionlessly and walked towards the villa. Lisa immediately followed behind him. Chapter 3385. Xiao Bao had always been troubled by one thing. That was, his mother didn't seem to be very happy staying in the Gu family. Chuho settled down in the Gu family. In fact, she didn't want to stay here. The huge Gu family was more like a prison to her, completely restricting her freedom. However, she had no choice but to stay here because of Xiao Bao. She couldn't leave him. He was her only support. Therefore, even if it was for Xiao Bao, she had no choice but to stay in the Gu family. Gu Jinglian sent a maid to serve her. In ancient times, this would be considered a personal maid. However, Chuho knew that this maid was staying by her side. On the surface, it looked like she was taking care of her daily life, but in fact, she was monitoring her in disguise. Gu Jinglian seemed to value Xiao Bao very much. This was beyond her expectations. Based on her understanding of Gu Jinglian, this man was a typical man who didn't believe in marriage. He didn't think much of women and children. He didn't seem to care much about descendants. It wasn't as if there weren't women who used all kinds of methods to get pregnant with his child and climb up the social ladder. However, Gu Jinglian was very vigilant about this matter, so no accidents had ever happened. She was probably the only exception. The maid who served her was called Jianjun. She wasn't an ordinary maid. Chuho had seen the lines on her arms by chance and knew that she must be a woman who knew martial arts. Therefore, she wasn't close to Jianjun. At first, when she was in the Gu family, she was ordered to leave the house and was grounded. In the Gu family, she did not have anywhere to go. She could only stay in her room, read books, or actively train. Her body gradually recovered, but after a long day, it was dull and boring. Later, Xiao Bao cried badly and pestered Uncle Fu for his mother. Uncle Fu reported it to Gu Jinglian, and Chuho finally had the right to go out. She usually woke up early to send Xiao Bao to kindergarten. In the afternoon, she and Uncle Fu would go to pick up Xiao Bao from school. The task of sending and fetching fell on her. Xiao Bao would pester her every night and sleep with her. The kindergarten gave a lot of homework. Some were homework to read outside the classroom, but most of it was manual work. However, Xiao Bao didn't seem to have any talent in manual work. He could draw half-heartedly, but when it came to cutting paper or other handicrafts, he had to beg the others in the Gu residence. For example, one day, the kindergarten gave homework to the children to make a three-dimensional greeting card. Xiao Bao. Uncle Fu immediately patted his chest and volunteered. Isn't this a simple task? Thus, he prepared a pair of scissors and colorful paper and started to work boldly and decisively. Half an hour later, Uncle Fu presented his work to Xiao Bao as if he was presenting a treasure. Xiao Bao looked at the messy mess and wanted to cry. Uncle Fu gritted his teeth and immediately gathered a group of men in the Gu residence to the study. When Chuho arrived at the study, she was shocked by the array of men in front of her. She saw a group of muscular, tall, and strong fighters of the Gu family hunched over a pile of paper with a frown. They held a pair of scissors and gestured up and down, but didn't know where to start. They were used to holding guns, fighting, being stabbed, and bleeding, but it was really difficult for a group of strong men to cut something so delicate with such a small pair of scissors. Chapter 33 86. Half an hour later, a group of men were crying and begging for mercy. "Young master, if you want us to start a fight, we can do it. We guarantee that we will climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of fire. But making a greeting card is too difficult. We don't know how." Xiao Bao said angrily. "Who wants you to fight and kill? It's just a simple manual task. Can't you do it?" "We really don't know how to do it." Yeah. This is much harder than beating people up." "That's right. When we were young, it was already a luxury to have food to eat and a book to study to. Unlike now, we don't know how to give such difficult homework." Xiao Bao hated them for being so disappointing, so he asked Gu Jinglian for help. Thus, he took the notebook and walked to Gu Jinglian's study. Gu Jinglian was practicing calligraphy when Xiao Bao pushed the door open and walked in. He climbed onto him on all fours, laid out the handmade paper and scissors in front of him, and pressed them on the xian paper. He demanded righteously, "Uncle, make a greeting card for me." Gu Jinglian was speechless. He looked coldly at the ink stain that Xiao Bao had accidentally spilled onto the xian paper. He held back his anger and asked through gritted teeth, "Do you want to die? Uncle, please help me." Xiao Bao tugged at his sleeve pitifully and was about to cry. "If you don't help, I won't be able to find anyone to help me. Make it yourself." "But I don't know how to do it." Xiao Bao said pitifully, "I don't know how to use scissors. It's so hard to learn." He bit his lip and stretched out his hands pitifully. His fingertips were full of scissors. It was obvious that he had been cut by scissors. Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. A hint of nervousness finally appeared in his eyes. "What happened?" I don't know how to use scissors. That's why I keep cutting my fingers." Gu Jinglian's lips twitched violently. He said impatiently, "So troublesome." However, even though he was stubborn, he still picked up the scissors and snorted coldly. "What do you want to make?" "Greeting card." Xiao Bao smirked. "The three-dimensional kind. A 3D greeting card. Who would do that?" Gu Jinglian's face was gloomy. He folded a piece of handmade paper into two halves and then waved his brush. A minute later, Xiao Bao stared blankly at the greeting card that Gu Jinglian had made. It was a piece of white handmade paper. It was folded in half, and there were two large words written on it with a brush, 3-dimensional. "Done." Gu Jinglian rested his chin on his hand. "A 3D greeting card." Xiao Bao's eyes widened in shock. "That's how it works? Didn't you say you want to make a 3D greeting card?" Gu Jinglian pointed at the two words on it. "Yes, it's very three-dimensional." Xiao Bao. This was truly a painstaking effort. "Uncle, you're too perfunctory. Is it so difficult to make a 3-dimensional greeting card? Harder than beating you up." Xiao Bao. If he still couldn't understand the thread in his words, then he would really be a silly Xiao Bao. He obediently packed up his belongings and walked to the door with a frown. Gu Jinglian looked at his aggrieved back and frowned. This guy was really useless. Late at night, Chuho walked past the study and inadvertently saw that the light was still on through the half-closed door. She opened the door doubtfully and saw Gu Jinglian sitting in front of the desk, yawning lazily. On the desk, there were all kinds of handmade paper in various colors. There were handmade knives, scissors, and other tools. Chapter 33, 87. He looked a little tired as he lowered his head. The greeting card in his hand was already half done. After Xiao Bao fell asleep, Uncle Fu came to tell him that Xiao Bao was crying because of the greeting card. Gu Jinglian secretly scolded him for being a good-for-nothing for crying over such a small matter. He ordered Uncle Fu to prepare the handmade paper. After studying it for a while, he began to work seriously. Actually, the three-dimensional greeting card was not difficult, but he did not have the patience to do so. However, a certain man had always had sharp tongue. When Xiao Bao cried, his heart softened. He did not say anything on the surface, but secretly started working at night while the little guy was asleep. The principle of the three-dimensional greeting card was very simple, but it required a lot of patience to work on it. The details were extremely complicated. If he was careless, he would fail at the last step. He followed the tutorial provided by Uncle Fu and finished the back. Then he used a pen to outline the lines on the drawing and used a handmade knife to cut it bit by bit. Chuho stood at the door and watched silently. She could not believe that this man had such patience. He had always valued time like gold and had always been stingy with wasting time on meaningless things. She did not expect that he would be so serious about dealing with Xiao Bao's handiwork. He seemed to be so focused that he did not even notice Chu Ho standing at the door. Chu Ho was a little curious about what he was doing, so she slowly walked into the study. The sudden footsteps finally startled him. Gu Jinglian looked up and met her inquisitive gaze. "What's wrong?" He raised his eyebrows expressionlessly. "You're still awake. Aren't you awake too?" Chu Ho walked coldly to the desk. Before she could take a closer look, Gu Jinglian casually hid the greeting card and looked at her vigilantly. "What are you looking at?" "I'm looking at what the greeting card you made looks like. I didn't make it." Gu Jinglian said stubbornly. "Uncle Fu made it." "Oh, then let me see what Uncle Fu's greeting card looks like." "Get lost." "What? Are you shy?" Chu Ho smiled and said, "Indeed, with your temperament, I don't think you have the patience to deal with a kindergarten's manual work." "I told you to shut up. Didn't you hear me?" Chu Ho reached out and pushed his arm away. Gu Jinglian blocked her hand with a backhand. "You won't let me see, but I insist on seeing." Chu Ho's other hand also reached for the handmade greeting card that he was blocking. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly, grabbed her wrist, and fiercely swung it away. "You dare?" Back and forth. The two of them had already exchanged 3 to 4 rounds of blows. Chu Ho was skilled in martial arts, but Gu Jinglian was no pushover either. His skills were definitely above hers, so he was able to block her attack in an instant. "My patience is limited, so," Gu Jinglian said coldly, "don't test my patience again." Chu Ho snorted disapprovingly. "It's probably because it's ugly." Gu Jinglian was speechless. "It's fine if you don't want to see it. I'm not interested anyway." After Chu Ho said that, she left the room without looking back. Gu Jinglian stared at her back view. This woman was getting more and more brazen. The next day, when Xiao Bao woke up, there was a greeting card on the bedside table. He rubbed his eyes and opened it curiously. However, when he opened the card, he saw a 3-dimensional cartoon cat coming into his view. Wow. Chapter 3388. Xiao Bao exclaimed in surprise. He was pleasantly surprised. The cat's scissors were lifelike. The corners and the details were exquisite without a trace of coarseness. The cat's expression was lazy and cute, and its big eyes were lively and charming. Was this a 3-dimensional greeting card? However, who was the one who did it? And who secretly put it on his bed? Could it be Uncle Fu? Xiao Bao put on his clothes and took the card to Uncle Fu. He asked excitedly, Uncle, did you make this?" Uncle Fu looked down at the card in his hand and smiled knowingly. He nodded. "Yeah, what do you think? Do you like it?" Xiao Bao nodded excitedly. "Yeah, I like it very much. I didn't expect Uncle Fu to make such a beautiful greeting card. But why was the card you made yesterday so ugly? This is what a greeting card should be." Uncle Fu scratched the back of his head guiltily. He coughed awkwardly and cleared his throat. "No, I was just trying to make you happy." But in reality, this greeting card was not made by him at all. In the morning, a man who had stayed up all night to make the card came to him and asked him to put the card on Xiao Bao's bed. Uncle Fu's eyes almost fell out of their sockets when he saw the greeting card made by Gu Jinglian. "Old master, I didn't know you were so clever with your hands." Gu Jinglian glared at him. "If it weren't for you useless people, I wouldn't have been so clever with my hands." Uncle Fu rubbed his nose awkwardly. "You don't even know how to make a greeting card. Have you really gone senile?" Fu Bo complained aggrievedly. "How could that be? I've never made one before." "Cut the crap," Gu Jinglian said. "If the next time, there definitely won't be a next time." Gu Jinglian turned around and was about to go back to his room when he suddenly thought of something. He said to Uncle Fu, "If that guy asks who did it, just say you did it. How would I dare to steal old master's credit? Do as I say." Gu Jinglian said coldly, "Did you hear that?" Uncle Fu looked at him and finally understood. He nodded. "If you dare to leak any information, I won't spare you." "Yes, master." Uncle Fu narrowed his eyes meaningfully and observed Gu Jinglian's uneasy expression. He knew. Master must have felt that staying up all night to make handicraft for the little guy was a very shameful thing. However, Lei was used to being stubborn and wanted to save face. Thus, Uncle Fu took the blame. Xiao Bao held the greeting card and found Chu Ho. He said happily, "Mom, look, Uncle Fu made a greeting card for me. Is it nice?" Chu Ho looked at the greeting card in his hand. The surface of the card was simple but exquisite. When he flipped it open, a lifelike kitten could be seen. However, Xiao Bao said that it was Uncle Fu who did it. She didn't think so. Gu Jinglian probably felt that it was too shameful for him to stay up all night to make a greeting card for a child, so he pushed the blame to Uncle Fu. It was hard to imagine that a man like him would make such a cute greeting card. It didn't match at all. Xiao Bao suddenly said regretfully, "If only Uncle made it." Chu Ho heard this but didn't understand. Why? Because Xiao Bao hugged the greeting card and pouted. "I want a greeting card made by Uncle." "Why must it be a greeting card made by Uncle?" Chu Ho squatted down with interest and saw Xiao Bao looking at her bashfully. He was a little embarrassed to say it out loud. Because he liked Uncle. Chapter 3389. Because he liked his uncle. Therefore, if it was something made by his uncle, he would cherish it even more. However, with his uncle's cold personality, he wouldn't have the patience to make such a childish thing, right? Xiao Bao took the greeting card to school. In class, the teacher asked the children to show off their handiwork. The children ran up the stage, either proud of their handiwork. The children in kindergarten had limited hands-on skills. Therefore, most of them completed their handiwork with the accompaniment of their parents. Most of the children said proudly, "My mom made this greeting card with me." Xiao Bao flipped open the greeting card he made, but he was a little disappointed. This greeting card was made by Uncle Fu, but how he wished that it was made by his uncle. When it was his turn to go on stage, he took his time and walked to the blackboard with the greeting card. The teacher walked to his side and squatted down gently. Seeing his complicated expression, she was a little puzzled. "What's wrong, Xiao Bao? Where's your greeting card?" Xiao Bao passed the greeting card in his hand to her. The teacher opened the greeting card. Before she could show it to the children, she was stunned by the exquisite greeting card. She thought to herself, "This greeting card is so exquisite, it must be the work of an adult. How can a child be so good at hands-on work?" Just by looking at the edges and corners, which were so smooth that there were no flaws, she knew that the parent must have put in a lot of effort to make this. The teacher immediately spread out the greeting card and showed it to the other children. There was an exclamation from below the stage. This made Xiao Bao feel very proud. When the children on stage before him showed their greeting cards, there weren't so many exclamations. This showed that his greeting card was very beautiful. "What a cute kitten. This is the most beautiful greeting card I've ever seen." The teacher was even more suspicious. She even suspected that the greeting card was bought. However, upon closer inspection, she realized that every stroke was hand-pasted. Even the color was painted on with a marker pen. It must have been done by the parent. However, even though she was well aware of it, in order to take care of the child's feelings, she still asked, "Who made this card with you?" Xiao Bao opened his small mouth and was just about to say the words, "Uncle Fu," when he looked at the little guys sitting below the stage. They all stared at him with their eyes wide open and were extremely curious. He suddenly swallowed the words, "Uncle Fu." He hesitated and fiddled with his fingers. He was a little unwilling, and his eyes couldn't help but redden. He was really envious. His friends were all accompanied by their parents, but for him, it was Uncle Fu who made it. It was not that he disliked Uncle Fu, but compared to Uncle Fu, he hoped that this greeting card was made by Gu Jinglian. With that thought in mind, he subconsciously said, "My father made this." "Your father?" Xiao Bao suddenly felt a little guilty, but he still forced himself to nod. In his heart, he hugged Uncle Fu's thigh and cried, "Wah, Uncle Fu, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to betray you." Even the teacher couldn't help but be shocked. Chapter 3390. For example, if a man were to do this kind of manual work, he would not be able to do it so meticulously. This greeting card was too exquisite. It was hard to imagine that there would be such a meticulous man who could do such a boring manual work so meticulously. "My dad is very awesome." Xiao Bao clasped his hand behind his back and said proudly, "My dad is the most handsome man in the world. Not only is he very tall, he's also very good at everything." He's the most handsome man I've ever seen. The teacher looked at him with a smile. Children were innocent and unaffected. In a child's heart, their father had always been an imposing and sacred figure. Below the stage, a chubby boy suddenly stood up and accused. Nonsense! Little Treasure looked at him and frowned curiously. What nonsense are you talking about? Nuhan, what do you mean? The chubby boy crossed his arms and said disdainfully, Your dad is definitely not as handsome as my dad. My dad is the most handsome man in the world. Just as he said that, Xiao Bao was not convinced. What right do you have to say that your dad is more handsome than my dad? My dad is the most handsome. Your dad is not. The chubby boy snorted and appeared to be very contemptuous. My dad is famous for being a handsome man. My mom said that when my dad was young, many girls chased after him. Hearing that, the teacher could not help but laugh. In an adult's view of the world, these words were nothing more than the most innocent and pure side of a child. However, Xiao Bao took it seriously. You're so fat. Your dad should be chubby too. When the chubby boy heard that, the baby fat on his face trembled and his chubby face flushed red. He said angrily, I'm not fat. You're fat. Big fatty, big fatty. The teacher hurriedly scolded, Xiao Bao, don't quarrel. You're wrong to say big fatty Nuhan. Although the chubby boy was so fat, it was because he was spoiled by his family. He did not have any taboos and had a big appetite, so it was inevitable that he would be white and fat. Xiao Bao had just transferred to the school, so he had never seen the chubby boy's father before. However, at the parent-teacher conference, the other children and teachers in the class had all seen his father. He was indeed quite handsome. Therefore, the children below defended the chubby boy and said, Nuhan's father is indeed very handsome, but we've never seen Xiao Bao's father before. That's right, Xiao Bao can't be bragging, right? Nuhan's father is really handsome. I've seen it with my own eyes. I just don't know why Nuhan is so fat. Poochie. The audience whispered to each other. Xiao Bao was indignant and said angrily, Anyway, my dad is the most handsome. I'm not bragging. The fat boy still wanted to say something, but the teacher immediately asked him to sit down. At the same time, Xiao Bao returned to his seat, temporarily calming down the situation. However, Xiao Bao, who had returned to his seat, glared at the chubby boy, neither of them willing to give in to the other. When it was time for the break, the chubby boy moved over and walked to his desk. In the past, he crossed his arms and said arrogantly, Xiao Bao, you brag that your dad is more handsome than my dad. You have to apologize to me. Why should I apologize? My dad is handsome. I'm not lying or bragging. Chapter 3391. My dad is the most handsome in the world. My dad is the most handsome in the world. My dad is the most handsome in the universe. My dad is more handsome than your dad. A little girl sitting in front of Xiao Bao could not take it anymore. She turned around and said helplessly, It's very simple. Xiao Bao, the parent-teacher conference is in a few days. When the time comes, your parents will definitely come. Is Nuhan's dad more handsome or your dad more handsome? Won't we know once we compete? Parent-teacher conference. Xiao Bao widened his eyes in shock. He remembered this. This was the first parent-teacher conference since he entered school, so he took it very seriously. However, he did not dare to tell Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. He was afraid that they would refuse. If they did not come, he would be very sad. He did not know if his uncle would come or not. What if his mom got angry when his uncle came? The relationship between the two of them did not seem to be very good. If his mom came and his dad did not come, then Nuhan would definitely advocate that his dad is the most handsome again. Xiao Bao felt a little troubled. For the first time in his life, he hoped that his uncle and mom's relationship could be like that of an ordinary family, loving and loving. That way, he could let them attend the parent-teacher conference together. Nuhan saw that Xiao Bao was silent and seemed to be hesitating. He said proudly, What? I think you don't dare to compete, right? I already said that you were bragging. You just had to compete with me. Who said that I don't dare to compete? Xiao Bao imitated his posture and crossed his arms. He said angrily, Let's compete then. Who's afraid of who? When the time comes, I'll let you see my most handsome dad in the world. Then it's a deal. Nuhan said disdainfully A braggart is a big, stupid pig. I'm not a big, stupid pig. Nuhan returned to her seat, and the storm came to a temporary end. The little girl, sitting in front of Xiao Bao, turned around and looked at the greeting card in his hand. She asked curiously, Xiao Bao, was that greeting card really made by your dad? Yeah. Xiao Bao scratched his head guiltily and nodded vaguely. The little girl showed an expression of admiration for the first time. Your dad is amazing. I thought he bought this greeting card. My dad made this. Your dad is so gentle. He's willing to spend time making greeting cards with you. My dad doesn't have the patience. Baby Chu recalled how Gu Jinglian had looked like he wanted to eat him alive when he begged him to make a greeting card last night. He forced a smile and said, My daddy is the best. After school, Chui came to pick him up, only to see his gloomy expression. What's wrong? Xiao Bao shook his head, but he obviously had a heavy heart. Chui hugged him in her arms and asked curiously, What's wrong? What's on Xiao Bao's mind now? Aren't you going to tell me? Mom, the parent-teacher conference is coming soon. Will you come? Chuho was stunned. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course I will. I thought it was something serious. So it's about this? Don't worry. Mom will definitely attend Xiao Bao's parent-teacher conference. Xiao Bao's eyes lit up. Really? Yeah. Xiao Bao jumped in her arms and said happily, Mom is the best. He looked obedient on the surface, but he was secretly laughing. Sure enough, his mom was the easiest to handle. Chapter 3392. In the study, Gu Jinglian was holding a brush and writing calligraphy. Usually, when he was free, he did not have any other hobbies. He was used to writing calligraphy or painting. Just as he was concentrating, the door was suddenly pushed open. A rippling voice drifted in. Uncle! Gu Jinglian's eyebrows twitched. Because he was shocked, the tip of the brush in his hand suddenly deviated and the stroke went far away. Uncle, are you there? Can I come in? Xiao Bao's voice was flattering and fawning. It was coquettish and had a hint of coquettishness. However, this coquettishness was beyond the limits of what an ordinary person could bear. Gu Jinglian looked up with an ashen face, only to see Xiao Bao leaning against the door. His body was leaning against the side of the door. His fair and tender face was blinking his eyes, as if he was throwing flirtatious glances at him. Was he trying to curry favor with him? But why was he trying to curry favor for no reason? What's the matter? There's something I want to tell you. Gu Jinglian raised his guard and snorted coldly. Come in. He removed the failed brush and ink, laid out a new layer of rice paper, dipped the brush in ink, and picked up the brush again. He had just written a line when he saw from the corner of his eye that Xiao Bao had received approval. Like a shy little girl, he used his sleeves to cover half of his face and moved shyly into the study. The corners of Gu Jinglian's eyes twitched violently. He put down the brush and sized him up calmly. He had a feeling that this guy was a little abnormal today. Xiao Bao ran in front of him with small, quick steps. He curtsied and even imitated a proper greeting. Greetings, uncle. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. You may rise. Xiao Bao stood up. His clear eyes were bright and clear. He blinked lightly and threw a flirtatious glance at Gu Jinglian. Uncle, there's something I don't know if I should discuss with you. Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes. Why did this guy suddenly speak in such a genteel manner? Had he been watching period dramas these days? Speak. This is what happened. Xiao Bao cleared his throat and said, The teacher gave us homework yesterday. With the help of Mom and Dad, we finished a greeting card. Isn't the greeting card completed? Xiao Bao complained bitterly, but that card was made by Uncle Fu, not you. Gu Jinglian's expression turned cold. Xiao Bao continued, feeling wronged. The other kids in the class are all accompanied by their parents. And then, Xiao Bao blinked and said cutely, However, if you feel guilty towards me, it's okay. There's still a chance to make it up to you. Compensation. To hell with it. He had stayed up all night to make a greeting card for him, and now he wanted him to compensate him? Compensate for what? It's like this. Xiao Bao rested his chin on the table, his two little paws holding the corner of the desk, and said with a smile, Soon, the kindergarten will hold a parent-teacher meeting. About this? Gu Jinglian said lightly, Let Uncle Fu accompany you. Why? Xiao Bao almost exclaimed, No. No. Why do you want Uncle Fu to accompany me? Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. Why? You want me to accompany you? Yeah. Xiao Bao nodded vigorously. Yes. Gu Jinglian said, I don't have time. You're lying. Xiao Bao said in an extremely aggrieved tone. You have so much time every day. Why can't you go to the parent-teacher meeting? Gu Jinglian said coldly. I'm bored. Whoosh. Chapter 3393. Xiao Bao clutched his chest sadly. He pointed at him with a trembling little finger and said pitifully, Bored? Let Uncle Fu go with you. Gu Jinglian picked up the weasel brush and dipped the tip of the brush in ink to lightly tap the tip of Xiao Bao's nose. A black dot the size of a bean instantly appeared on the originally fair tip of his nose. A hint of a smile finally appeared on the man's cold and elegant face. His gaze fell on the Xian paper again as he said mildly, You can discuss this matter with Uncle Fu. Xiao Bao suddenly ran to his side. His two little hands balled into fists as he gently knocked on his thigh and massaged him from time to time, trying to please him in every possible way. Even if you're bored, you should still go. As he said this, he ran to his side again. His two little hands worked strenuously to massage his shoulders as he said energetically, Go, go. He narrowed his eyes. I'm not free. Xiao Bao said bitterly. Daddy and Mommy will always go to a child's parent-teacher conference. Uncle Fu isn't my daddy. Gu Jinglian was stunned. His heart was actually touched by this resentful remark. He looked up, and his gaze fell on Xiao Bao. He saw him lying on his thigh, fiddling with his fingers aggrievedly. From time to time, he would look at him angrily, obviously sulking. Gu Jinglian suddenly snorted meaningfully. Haven't you always called me uncle? Xiao Bao was speechless. How can uncle go to your parent-teacher conference? Xiao Bao was speechless. Gu Jinglian picked up the brush and wrote a few more strokes. Unless you change to calling me daddy, I won't go. He knew very well that Xiao Bao would never change to call him daddy. This was because this little guy seemed to be very sensitive to Chu Ho's feelings. Although this little guy was young and clumsy in everything he did, his ability to read people's expressions was very good. It seemed that because of Chu Ho, even though he knew that he was his father, he found it difficult to change the way he addressed him and call him daddy. Daddy. Xiao Bao straightened his head and called out. Gu Jinglian's hand trembled, and the ink under his hand became distorted. He looked up in disbelief and frowned with a complicated expression, only to see little Treasure lying in front of the table with an excited expression. If he had a tail, he would definitely be like an enthusiastic puppy, wagging his tail continuously. If I call you daddy, will you attend my parent-teacher conference? Xiao Bao. The corners of Gu Jinglian's lips twitched violently. When did this rascal become so unprincipled? He thought his mouth was mouse mouth. He didn't expect him to change. How much did this guy want him to attend the parent-teacher conference? Gu Jinglian put down the weasel brush and lazily rested his chin on his hand. He said slowly, Since you want me to go so badly, then I'll spare half a day. Half a day isn't enough. The parent-teacher conference takes a whole day. Gu Jinglian was speechless. So troublesome? Okay. It's rare. This parent-teacher conference is very, very important to me. Xiao Bao swayed his little butt and put his palms together to beg him, looking very sincere. It was as if this parent-teacher conference was really important to him. Why? Because, just as he was about to say it, he suddenly thought of something. Xiao Bao suddenly pursed his little mouth awkwardly and said, It's a secret. He couldn't tell him whose father was more handsome. Chapter 3394. If he didn't go, those kids would say that he was bragging. But he clearly wasn't bragging. If he went to the parent-teacher conference, those kids would be shocked. Gu Jinglian reluctantly agreed. I'll make an exception this time. There won't be a next time. Okay. Xiao Bao wagged his tail in joy and then said to him, Then you and my mom will go together. Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes when he heard this. What? Both of you? Xiao Bao saw his serious expression and suddenly felt uneasy. Both of you and my mom will go together. If she goes, there's no need for me to go. Gu Jinglian said coldly. Why? One person is enough to go to the parent-teacher conference. Xiao Bao puffed up his cheeks and glared at him angrily. He was obviously really sad. He stomped his feet in anger and said gloomily, I hate uncles the most. After saying that, she wiped her tears and ran away. Even though she ran far away, her miserable cries still echoed in the long corridor. Gu Jinglian's eyelids suddenly twitched violently. The next day, Xiao Bao arrived at the kindergarten. Early in the morning, he saw a group of children gathered together and excitedly passing around something that looked like a photo. Xiao Bao stuffed his little school bag under the table and sat down gloomily. He rested his chin on his hand and looked out of the window in a daze. When the chubby boy saw him, he immediately snatched the photo back from the child's hand. He walked to Xiao Bao's side and waved the photo in front of him. Xiao Bao looked away uninterestedly, his attitude cold. Last night, he cried himself to sleep under the blanket. When he woke up, his eyes were a little swollen. When Chuho asked, he only said perfunctorily that he didn't sleep well. However, only God knew how sad he was when Gu Jinglian said that he wasn't going to attend the parent-teacher conference. The chubby boy said, I'll show you how handsome my dad is. At the side, a group of children gathered around and chattered. I think Nuhan's father is more handsome than many of the celebrities on TV. It's such a pity that you're not a star. Exactly. If you become a celebrity, you'll definitely earn a lot of money. The fat boy turned around and said disapprovingly, Humph. How much money could a celebrity earn? My father runs a company, and he earns a few million a month. Wow. The group of little fellows exclaimed in surprise. They were all envious of him. Nuhan's father is handsome and owns a company. He's really amazing. Xiao Bao took the photo from the fat boy's hand and glanced at it. The man in the photo was very young. The background was at the entrance of a university. He was wearing a scholar's uniform. His face was indeed somewhat handsome. However, compared to Gu Jinglian, the difference was like heaven and earth. He threw the photo aside and snorted coldly. I was wondering how handsome your father was. Anyway, he's not as handsome as my father. Bragging, the chubby boy picked up the photo from the ground and said angrily, Xiao Bao, you only know how to brag. His father is definitely not as handsome as your father. Exactly. Nuhan's father is so powerful. Moreover, his name is so nice. Nuhan sounds much better than Xiao Bao, Chu. Chapter 3395. When Xiao Bao heard this, he suddenly stood up agitatedly. Who said that my name is unpleasant? Xiao Bao was named by my mom. I like the name Xiao Bao. The little girl sitting in front turned around. She was a little unhappy with the chubby boy's arrogant behavior. She sided with Xiao Bao and said, Xiao Bao, didn't the teacher say that you changed your name? Guqingze, I think it sounds much better than Nuhan. Yeah, the group of children clamored. Then why were you called Xiao Bao Chu before? It's so unpleasant and feels so old-fashioned. Because Mom said that I was her precious baby, so I named myself Xiao Bao. Then why did you change your surname to Chu and change it to Gu now? Chu is my mom's surname. Wow. Then why did you take your mom's surname? Could it be? A child laughed and said, Your mom remarried with you, right? Is this dad of yours your biological dad? It's not like what you're saying. Xiao Bao said angrily, My dad dotes on my mom. That's why he let me take my mom's surname from the beginning. So that's how it is. This reason seemed to be convincing. A child asked, Xiao Bao, do you have a picture of your dad? Xiao Bao said guiltily, No. The chubby boy said mockingly, He wouldn't dare to take it out. That's not it. Xiao Bao, when it's the parent-teacher conference, your dad will definitely come. When that time comes, won't you see Xiao Bao's dad? Don't make a fuss. The little girl in front tried her best to defend Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao looked at her gratefully and said with a smile, Thank you, Shang-er. Shang-er smiled sweetly and held her hand. It's okay, we're friends. I believe everything Xiao Bao says. Xiao Bao suddenly felt a little uneasy. If his uncle really didn't come to the parent-teacher conference, Shang-er would definitely be disappointed in him. The bell rang, and the teacher walked into the classroom. The children returned to their seats, but Xiao Bao was lost in thought. After returning home from school, Little Treasure returned to his room and sat in front of his desk with a frown on his face. Chuho walked over and checked the homework assigned by the teacher for him. Seeing his disappointed face, he could not help but feel strange. What happened? She felt strange. You don't seem happy these 2 days. Xiao Bao looked at her, but looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. Chuho asked him again and again before he finally told him the truth. In class, the chubby boy had always been at odds with him, always going against him. However, there was indeed some conflict between the 2 children. Sitting in front of Xiao Bao was Shang'er. She was the prettiest and freshest girl in the class. Many boys in the class liked to get close to her. The chubby boy was no exception. Originally, Shang'er was the chubby boy's desk mate. However, boys of this age would mostly use tricks to attract girls' attention. They would bump into her from time to time in class, and sometimes they would secretly pull her hair. Shang'er was tired of him and wanted to change seats. Shang'er raised her hand and said that she did not want to be Nuhan's desk mate. Thus, the teacher moved her to sit in front of Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao was a gentlemanly child. He was very polite and was very popular with the girls in the class. Chapter 3396. Xiao Bao was also trying to vent his anger in this competition. At the same time, he also had a small wish in his heart. He hoped that Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian could attend the parent-teacher conference together like ordinary loving parents. However, he also vaguely understood that this request seemed to be a little too much. When Chu Ho heard this, she felt a little guilty. The grudge between her and Gu Jinglian was an adult matter that affected the child. She didn't expect that the impact would be so deep. Furthermore, he did not expect Xiao Bao to have such a wish all this while. She asked, "Is Uncle willing to go?" Xiao Bao said bitterly, "He seems a little unwilling." Chu Ho was stunned but didn't say anything. If Gu Jinglian was willing to go to the parent-teacher conference, even if she was unwilling, she would play the role of Mrs. Gu for Xiao Bao's sake. However, if Gu Jinglian wasn't willing, she couldn't force him to do anything. At night, Gu Jinglian was sitting in the study reading a book. Uncle Fu walked in and helped him put away the ink, paper, and inkstone. "Is that guy asleep?" Fu Bo nodded. She cried for a while and fell asleep with Red Lotus. Cried. Gu Jinglian looked up with a puzzled expression. "What's the matter now?" "It's about the parent-teacher conference." Gu Jinglian was a little puzzled. "It's just a parent-teacher conference. Why does he care so much?" Uncle Fu cleared his throat and coughed. According to the little guy, he made a bet with a boy in class. "A bet?" "Yes." Xiao Bao said that the boy wanted to compete with him to see whose father is more handsome. Gu Jinglian was speechless. So this was the reason? He was speechless. "Old master, why don't you spare a day to accompany the little guy to the parent-teacher conference?" Gu Jinglian said in a low voice, "You know that I can't show my face easily." Uncle Fu was put in a difficult position. Indeed, with old master's status, it was indeed not easy for him to appear in public. When he went out, he was accompanied by a group of bodyguards. It was not for the sake of appearances, but because with his identity, if he appeared in public, it would be easy for other forces to assassinate him. The Gu family had a reputation and prestige in the capital. Although they had cleaned up some of their businesses over the years, they were still the most prosperous family in the underworld. A tall tree attracts the wind, and it's lonely at the top. Every trip was accompanied by the danger of being assassinated. Therefore, when Gu Jinglian went out, he was always accompanied by more than 10 bodyguards. If such a large group appeared on campus, it would inevitably be inappropriate. But the little guy cried for a long time, as if he was very sad. Even I felt sad when I saw that. Uncle Fu nagged, "It's only a day. When the time comes, I will send people to ambush in the dark to protect Old Master. Moreover, if Red Lotus is by your side, you can pretend to be husband and wife with her. If you meet with an accident, she can protect you with her skills. I'm not worried about myself." Gu Jinglian put down his book and said coldly, "I'm afraid that the child will be hurt. Don't worry about that. I will send people to clear the area in advance. I will send people to patrol a few miles around the school." "Okay," Gu Jinglian said lightly. Then you can arrange it for me. Uncle Fu was overjoyed when he heard this. Old master, do you agree? What else? Chapter 3397. Soon, the notice for the parent-teacher conference was sent out. However, Xiao Bao crumpled it into a ball and threw it into the bin. Anyway, his uncle wouldn't come. He had made it clear that day that he found it troublesome and boring. So he definitely wouldn't come. This was nothing more than a piece of scrap paper. Thus, he didn't take this matter to heart anymore. For the past few days, the little guy had been sulking. Uncle Fu naturally didn't tell him about this and wanted to give him a surprise. On the day of the parent-teacher conference, Uncle Fu went to wake Xiao Bao up. Xiao Bao sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes. Then he saw Uncle Fu holding a brand new kindergarten uniform in front of him. Uncle Fu smiled and said, "Little master, today is the parent-teacher conference. Change your clothes and quickly get up to wash your face and brush your teeth." It would have been better if he hadn't said that. Once he said that, Xiao Bao's fair and tender little face immediately wrinkled up. He pouted his little mouth bitterly, and his eyes looked as though they were about to rain. Seeing this, Uncle Fu hurriedly sat by the window and looked at him in confusion. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Don't cry, don't cry." "What parent-teacher conference?" Xiao Bao's tender and childish voice was full of resentment. "Uncle isn't going. He's a big baddie. I've already begged him so pitifully, but he didn't give me any face. I invited him to my parent-teacher conference, but he looked unhappy. What's the point of the parent-teacher conference if he doesn't go?" As he said that, he rubbed his eyes again, feeling wronged, and the rims of his eyes turned red. Uncle Fu's heart ached, and he coaxed him. "Oh, don't cry, don't cry. Who said that old master isn't going? Be good, don't cry. Don't worry, old master will definitely accompany little master to the parent-teacher conference. Don't worry." "You're lying." Xiao Bao complained sadly. "Uncle won't go." "Who said so?" "Uncle said it himself. That day he had already made it very clear. He won't go. Because the parent-teacher conference is boring and uninteresting. He won't go." Uncle Fu immediately hugged him and shook him. "Nonsense. Old master obviously went. He's already up and downstairs for breakfast in the dining room." "Really?" Xiao Bao's eyes widened in shock. There were still tears in his eyes. He quickly put on his clothes. His tie was still undone, and his jacket was crooked. He rushed downstairs anxiously and staggered to the dining room. He was surprised to see Gu Jinglian sitting in the dining room, eating a sandwich and casually flipping through the newspaper. Hearing footsteps, Gu Jinglian's voice, Xiao Bao's lips suddenly trembled violently. He was excited, and his eyes were brimming with tears. He felt inexplicably moved, and all of a sudden, he threw himself into his arms and hugged his thigh tightly. "Uncle, Uncle Fu, I knew you wouldn't abandon me." Gu Jinglian's lips twitched, and he furrowed his brows. "What do you mean by abandon you?" "Uncle Fu said that you're willing to go to the parent-teacher conference. Is that true?" Gu Jinglian snorted coldly, confirming that it was true. However, when he opened his eyes, he saw from the corner of his eye that the little guy in his arms looked like he was about to cry. His face stiffened, and he stared blankly at the little guy who was so touched that he was about to cry. "Uncle, you're so nice." Chapter 3398. Did he think that any uncle who accompanied him to the parent-teacher conference was good? Xiao Bao sized him up and saw that he was wearing a casual shirt. He suddenly stood aside and crossed his arms to size him up. Gu Jinglian met his gaze in confusion and raised his eyebrows. "What's wrong? Are you going to wear this today?" "Yes." "Why don't you wear a shirt and a suit?" "It's troublesome. Moreover, for this trip, the more ordinary and casual it was, the better." Xiao Bao was not satisfied. "Uncle looks more handsome in a suit." In Xiao Bao's eyes, Gu Jinglian was so handsome in a well-ironed suit that it angered the gods. Gu Jinglian clenched his fists. "Give me an inch, and I want a mile. Wear it. Wear it. You look so handsome in a suit." Xiao Bao begged as he wrapped his arms around him. Gu Jinglian's patience was at its limit. Just as he was about to flare up, he suddenly thought of Uncle Fu's words. "Young master is so pitiful. Old master, do you know? In Xiao Bao's heart, you have always been a great figure. You can't ruin this heroic image. He held it in and did not get angry. 10 minutes later, Chu-ho changed her clothes and came downstairs. Uncle Fu had just tidied up Xiao Bao's clothes. At this moment, the little guy was sitting at the dining table and eating breakfast with relish. Uncle Fu saw her come down and smiled at her. Chu-ho was a little embarrassed and asked, "Where is he?" Old Master went upstairs to change into a suit. A suit? Chu-ho was a little confused. It's just a parent-teacher conference. Why do you have to dress so formally? Xiao Bao said righteously. Because Uncle looks the most handsome in a suit. She was actually speechless. Soon, Gu Jinglian changed into a suit and came downstairs. When he saw Chu-ho, he ignored her and walked past her into the restaurant. At that time, he had changed into a suit and stunned Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao's eyes widened, and he immediately jumped down from his seat. He circled around him and exclaimed, "Oh my God! Uncle is so handsome! I knew it! Uncle looks the most handsome in a suit." Gu Jinglian was speechless, but he was suddenly pulled to Chu-ho's side by the little girl. The two of them were forced together. Xiao Bao rubbed his chin and squinted his eyes to size them up, as if he was studying something. For a moment, Chu-ho's entire body stiffened. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "What are you looking at? Why do I feel like something's missing?" Xiao Bao urged, "Stand closer." Gu Jinglian was speechless. Chu-ho said, "Xiao Bao, stop fooling around. Other people's parents are very loving. Why are you standing together as if you're enemies?" Xiao Bao walked forward and pushed Gu Jinglian to Chu-ho's side. The tall man stood beside her, and in an instant, she felt as if the whole world had become narrow. Gu Jinglian's face was ashen. Why was it so troublesome to attend a parent-teacher conference? Did they still have to put on an act? Xiao Bao said again, "Uncle, smile." "No." The little boy shook his head and said sternly, "You have to change the way you address me. You can't call me uncle anymore." He walked to Gu Jinglian and held his large palm with his two small hands. He said coquettishly, "Daddy, you should hold Mommy's hand. Otherwise, people will think that you have a bad relationship." As he said this, he stuffed Chu-ho's hand into Gu Jinglian's palm. Chapter 33:99. Chu-ho instinctively retracted his hand, his face burning hot. Xiao Bao said unhappily, "Mom, why aren't you cooperating?" He crossed his arms and turned his body to one side, looking angry. Beside him, Uncle Fu immediately winked at Chu-ho and Gu Jinglian, as if he was communicating secretly. "Just let him be." Uncle Fu mouthed a reminder. While Chu-ho was hesitating, Gu Jinglian's lips suddenly curved into a cold smile. He raised his hand and held Chu-ho's hand, but he only held it lightly and didn't hold it too tightly. From the looks of it, it was already barely enough. "Is this okay?" Gu Jinglian was already making the biggest concession. Xiao Bao turned his head and looked at him seriously for a while. Suddenly, he expressed his opinion. "Uncle, Dad, are you smiling or gritting your teeth? I feel that your face is a little fierce and not gentle at all." Gu Jinglian was on the verge of exploding. He wasn't a gentle person to begin with. Xiao Bao pestered him and said, "Why don't you try smiling?" Chu-ho immediately squatted down and pulled Xiao Bao in front of him. He patiently guided him. "Xiao Bao, don't worry, Uncle, Mom, and Dad will definitely perform well. At the parent-teacher conference, even if you don't remind us, we will definitely be very loving. But we're not at school yet, so don't force us, okay?" Xiao Bao then nodded resentfully and said, Okay. He was already very satisfied that Gu Jinglian was willing to go to his parent-teacher conference with his mother. After breakfast, Uncle Fu sent Gu Jinglian, Chu-ho, and his mother to the car. For today's trip, he had put in a lot of effort in advance. Before this, he had already sent 2 groups of people to Xiao Bao's school. Along the way, there were also people secretly protecting him at all times. There would definitely be no accidents. With Uncle Fu in charge, Gu Jinglian could rest assured. Therefore, he didn't ask any more questions. The car sped away, leaving behind a trail of dust. Along the way, the car was silent. Gu Jinglian sat in the back seat with his arms crossed over his chest and his long legs crossed elegantly. Baby Chu, on the other hand, was sitting next to Chu He. He was obviously very happy, so much so that along the way, his legs were kicking up and down. He was obviously in a good mood. He was humming a nursery rhyme that he learned from music lessons. His head was swaying back and forth, and he was in high spirits. Chuho saw that he was very happy, and his heart relaxed a little. She looked up, but her gaze inadvertently met with the man sitting opposite her. Gu Jinglian's posture was relaxed. He leaned lazily against the back of the seat, but his cold gaze fell on her. She couldn't help but shudder. She turned her eyes slightly. Somehow, she felt that his gaze on her was like a sharp thorn in her back. It was already late when they arrived at the entrance of the kindergarten. There were all kinds of expensive cars parked at the entrance. All the students who enrolled in this kindergarten came from extraordinary families. They were either rich or respectable. The car stopped steadily at the entrance of the school. Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao and got out of the car. Chuho carried Xiao Bao's school bag and also got out of the car. She had just closed the car door when she suddenly felt that her hands were empty. She turned around in surprise and saw that Gu Jinglian had taken his school bag. He carried Xiao Bao in his left hand and held his school bag in his right. When Chuho saw this, she immediately said, "Let me carry Xiao Bao." "No need." Gu Jinglian turned around and slowly entered the school with the crowd. Chapter 3400. As he passed by, the other students looked at him in surprise as he walked toward the school gate. It was not because of his stunning good looks, but because of the aura he exuded. It was inviolable, sharp, and had an inviolable elegance. Oh my God, is this man a parent too? He's so handsome. He was born with a celebrity face. No way. He's so young. I can't tell that he's already a father. Also, did you notice that he looks like a celebrity? I remember now. Is that celebrity called Gu Xingze? Now that you mention it, I noticed it too. They do look alike, but their auras are different. Comparisons are odious. They're both children in the middle class, but look at mine. His belly is so big. A group of people looked at Gu Jinglian's back and whispered among themselves. Chuho was stunned for a moment, then followed him nervously. At the school gate, the crowd was surging. Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao until they entered the school gate. Then he put Xiao Bao down. At this moment, the parents in the corridor were in a hurry as they followed their children to their respective classes. Xiao Bao was in the first classroom on the third floor. The classes were assigned according to the names of the flowers. He was in the sunflower class, which meant that he was the son of light and the son of heaven. Along the way, it was inevitable that they would be delayed because of the crowd. When Gu Jinglian and Chuho followed Xiao Bao to the classroom door, Xiao Bao passed by the window and saw that most of the parents were already seated. He seemed to be a little late. Gu Jinglian saw him standing at the side of the classroom and hesitating to enter. He frowned and asked, "What's the matter? We seem to be late." Xiao Bao said awkwardly, "You're going to be late. Why aren't you going in?" Chuho urged angrily. This guy was so stupid sometimes that it made people angry. Xiao Bao nodded and ran into the classroom. Standing at the door, he pinched the corner of his shirt and said shyly, "Teacher, good morning." As soon as he finished speaking, he was stunned by the scene before him. In a huge classroom, there was a group of people. Other than him, all the parents of the children had already arrived and were seated. There were 7 rows of tables and chairs in the classroom, and each table had 2 seats. The children sat on the seats while their parents sat beside them, forming a small triangle. However, the funny thing was that because it was a middle shift, the seats were very short. This was just right for children, but for many parents, it was too narrow and short, not to mention Gu Jinglian's imposing height. The fat boy saw him at a glance and suddenly stood up. He said proudly, "Xiao Bao, you're here. Where are your parents?" He was so arrogant that he seemed to be waiting to see him make a fool of himself. Xiao Bao looked beside him and saw a man dressed in a suit. He was dressed very formally, and even his hair was carefully combed. He sat beside the fat boy. He looked young and handsome, and compared to the other parents, he was indeed the one who stood out. When Nuhan's father walked into the classroom just now, he had caused quite a commotion. It was no doubt because among all the children's parents, the fat boy's father was indeed the most handsome. Chapter 3401. Many of the children were very excited. They surrounded Nuahan's father and looked at him with admiration. Some even said, Xiao Bao isn't here yet. He must be too embarrassed to come. His father can't be compared to Nuo Han's father. That's right. Look at him, he came alone. He was still talking about how handsome his father was. He must be bragging. Nuo Han's father is the most handsome. I'm so envious of Nuo Han. If only I had such a handsome father. And Nuo Han's father is so powerful. I saw his father drive a luxurious car here today. Also, Nuo Han's family is very rich. His father's company makes millions every month. Nuo Han's face was even more pleased with himself. He crossed his arms and looked at Xiao Bao arrogantly. How was it? He couldn't be compared to him. Now, all the children in the class thought that his father was the most handsome. Let's see what this stupid Xiao Bao can do. The chubby boy provoked him with contemptuous eyes from time to time. Xiao Bao was so angry that his face turned red. The teacher looked at him and asked curiously, Xiao Bao, where are your parents? Before Xiao Bao could speak, Gu Jinglian held Chu Ho's hand and walked past the classroom window. His tall and slender figure attracted the attention of all the parents and children in the class immediately. Some of the children stared at him with their eyes wide open. Many of the parents were also shocked. This man was really too tall. Just by looking at him, he was about 9 meters tall. They didn't know if it was because of his height, but his aura was intimidating. His every move had the aura of a magnificent army, looking down on all living things. Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho walked to the door and stood behind Xiao Bao. Chu Ho smiled and said, Hello, teacher. The teacher was stunned. You are, without waiting for Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian to introduce them. Xiao Bao immediately said, Teacher Xue, this is my father and mother. Gu Jinglian responded with a cold smile, appearing polite but indifferent. Sorry, I'm late. Teacher Xue was shocked speechless. When the fat boy saw Gu Jinglian, his mouth opened so wide that he could swallow several eggs. His eyes widened as he stared at Gu Jinglian in disbelief. Were they Xiao Bao's parents? Liar. Impossible. At this moment, the chubby boy was completely stunned by Gu Jinglian's astonishingly handsome appearance. Xiao Bao's appearance belonged to the cute type. Therefore, the chubby boy had imagined what Xiao Bao's parents looked like, but he never would have thought that Xiao Bao's father would be so handsome. Gu Jinglian's facial features were more feminine. His facial features were cold and elegant, but they carried a kind of invasive beauty. However, his facial features were very handsome and upright. He had sword-like eyebrows, phoenix eyes, a high-nose bridge, and thin lips. This was a beauty that could destroy the world. It had nothing to do with gender. Even if it was a man, in front of such an arrogant man, they would feel ashamed of their inferiority. This kind of man was not usually seen in real life. He could only be seen on television. However, even Gu Xingze, who was once known as the beauty of the century, would pale in comparison to him. If the two of them stood together, it would be difficult to tell who was better. Chapter 34:02. Gu Xingze was a rare beauty in the entertainment industry. It was a pity that he had passed away at such a young age. However, this man's eyes and eyebrows bore some resemblance to Gu Xingze's. The most outrageous thing was that this man was shockingly young. Just by looking at his face, one could tell that he wasn't even 28 years old. And the woman standing next to Gu Jinglian was Xiao Bao's mother. Perhaps with Gu Jinglian in front of her, the second look at her was not as stunning as before, but she was definitely a woman with delicate features. Her eyebrows had a heroic spirit that ordinary women didn't have. Her facial features were beautiful but serious. Although she tried her best to appear gentle, as someone from the Interpol, she had a dignified aura that couldn't be ignored. Teacher, Xiao Bao saw that Teacher Xue was still in a daze and tried to call out to her a few times. Teacher Xue came back to her senses and immediately said, You must be Xiao Bao's parents. Please return to your seat. The parent-teacher conference is about to start. Gu Jinglian held Xiao Bao's hand and returned to their seats with Chu Ho under everyone's shocked gazes. After Xiao Bao sat down, Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho ran into some difficulties. Although the chairs that the parents were sitting on were especially high, Gu Jinglian's tall and slender body was still stretched out when he sat down. Chuho had no choice but to stand up awkwardly and move the table slightly. Only then did the two tall people have a small space to sit. A few of the parents couldn't help but mumble in surprise. They're so tall. I feel that it's quite uncomfortable for them to sit in such a small space. The couple is so tall and so good-looking. When a child grows up, he'll definitely be very tall too. Shanger turned around and looked at Xiao Bao. She praised sincerely, Xiao Bao, your father is really handsome, much more handsome than Nuo Han's father. Xiao Bao smirked proudly, but was immediately embarrassed by the compliment. Blushing, she said, of course my dad is handsome. Children did not understand hypocrisy and modesty. Even if they were embarrassed to be praised, they would still happily accept it. Gu Jinglian frowned. There were many ways for young masters to compete with each other. However, this was the first time his own son had compared him to see whose father was more handsome. He didn't particularly care about his appearance, but because he had a serious obsession with cleanliness, he always took care of himself. Coupled with his exceptional looks and height, it could be said that he was particularly conspicuous among the group of parents. Ms. Shui stood on the podium and smiled at the audience. Dear parents, hello. First of all, please allow me, on behalf of all the teachers and students of Sunflower Class, to extend our warm welcome and sincere thanks to all the parents present today. Ms. Shui was giving a speech on the podium. However, below the podium, whether it was the parents or the children, all of them were secretly sizing up Gu Jinglian. Chuho sat in his seat and felt the gazes from all around him. For a moment, he felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles and felt uncomfortable all over. She used to be a criminal police officer. Whether it was in the past or now, she didn't like the feeling of being watched in disguise. Especially Nuo Han's father, who kept nagging Gu Jinglian to look at her direction. Chuho raised his eyebrows unhappily and followed his line of sight to glare at him. Chapter 34:03. Gu Jinglian was speechless. What kind of game is this? I'm not playing. Chuho's eyebrows twitched. Just as he was about to say something, Teacher Shui called out from the podium, Little you. Clap, clap, clap. The group of children patted each other's shoulders enthusiastically. Some of the more clumsy children were slower to react. When they heard Little you as command, they slapped their thighs. Even though the parents felt awkward and felt that this game was extremely childish, they still had to cooperate with their children. Therefore, they responded sparsely. Only Gu Jinglian sat in his seat and did not move at all. Teacher Shui laughed and said, Xiao Bao's father is not keeping up with everyone's rhythm. Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows impatiently. Damn it. Xiao Bao laughed and said mockingly, Daddy, you're so stupid. You don't even know how to play such a simple game. Gu Jinglian glared at him. Shut up. Xiao Bao obediently shut his mouth. Shanger, who was sitting in front, saw this and mumbled, Xiao Bao, your father is so fierce. Really? My father never dares to be fierce to me. Gu Jinglian saw the two children looking at each other and whispering to each other. Behind him, Chuho poked him with his finger and said angrily, Are you here for a parent-teacher conference or just sitting around? Since you're already here, don't put on airs. Gu Jinglian said coldly, Why didn't I hear about such a stupid game before coming here? Xiao Bao moved closer to him and whispered, Daddy, don't be embarrassed. Otherwise, everyone will think that you're stupid for not knowing how to play such a simple game. Gu Jinglian looked around. Just as Xiao Bao said, seeing that he was sitting still, the other children whispered, Xiao Bao's father is so stupid. He doesn't even know how to play such a simple game. Shame on him. No wonder Xiao Bao was born so stupid. Gu Jinglian glanced over coldly. The child who said that Xiao Bao was stupid immediately had his mouth covered by his mother. Shoo, don't say it. How dare he call his son stupid? It's starting. Chuho nudged him. Teacher Shui gave another command. Rainstorm. Da-da-da. A group of people stomped their feet. Gu Jinglian was caught between a rock and a hard place. He stepped on it symbolically, but his face darkened. Chuho tried his best to hold back his laughter. Only the heavens knew how interesting it was for this man to play such a childish game. His face was especially dark, as if he was about to explode at any moment. It seemed that only during Xiao Bao's parent-teacher conference would there be such an opportunity for this Demon King to play such a childish game with a bunch of little kids. Moderate rain. Pa-pa-pa xiaoyu. Pa-pa-pa rainstorm. Da-da-da. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. During the break, Gu Jinglian leaned against the wall in the corridor with an ashen face. His almond-shaped eyes were gloomy. Xiao Bao stood pitifully beside him and said innocently, "All right, Daddy, don't be angry. Next time, I won't let you play such a boring game." "There won't be a next time." The chubby boy pulled Li Xianlai to the corridor and saw Xiao Bao hugging Gu Jinglian's long legs. The chubby boy pointed at Xiao Bao and said, "Daddy, that's him. His name is Gu Qingze. He's been bullying me." Chapter 3404. The chubby boy nodded and waited for his father to stand up for him. Li Xianlai walked up to Gu Jinglian and greeted him with a smile. "You're Gu Qingze's father, aren't you?" Gu Jinglian looked up and glanced at him. His icy gaze swept over him before he smirked coldly. "What's the matter? It's nothing special. I just wanted to meet my rumored competitor." Li Xianlai said casually, "Children don't know any better and are actually competing over such childish things. Do you know what the two of them are doing compared to us? I've always heard from my son that your Xiao Bao said that you're the most handsome father in the world. It made me a little curious too. However, now that I've seen you in person, you really live up to your reputation." Gu Jinglian's reaction was very cold. He was a man of few words, so he didn't respond to Li Xianlai's greetings and only smiled coldly. It was obvious that he didn't care. As a result, Li Xianlai was extremely embarrassed and couldn't find a way out. His expression suddenly became a little unhappy. Usually, in the company, it was only his subordinates who complimented him. He didn't care about other people's expressions. Li Xianlai purposely picked on Gu Jinglian not only for his son's reputation, but also for his own reputation. He said, "I don't think I've heard you mention before. What do you do for a living?" Gu Jinglian said coldly, "That's not for you to ask about." Li Xianlai suddenly felt suffocated again. Gu Jinglian's tone was neither cold nor warm. Although his words were concise and comprehensive, the arrogance in his words couldn't be concealed at all. It made Li Xianlai extremely embarrassed. He snorted coldly and said, "I didn't expect you to be so arrogant. It seems like you've been in power for a long time, so you speak with such an arrogant tone. If you ask me, there's no shortage of important people here. Most of the people who can send their children to this kindergarten are worth tens of millions or more. Even if you really have some background, you don't have to be so arrogant, right?" These words were a classic example of hitting the nail on the head. Gu Jinglian was already fuming because of the boring conversation just now. He said coldly, "Do I need to ask for your opinion on my attitude and emphasis?" When Xiao Bao saw this, he couldn't help but worry that Gu Jinglian would make things difficult for Li. He immediately said, "Dad, don't be angry. Don't stoop to his level. Let's go into the classroom." With that, he held Gu Jinglian's hand and walked into the classroom. Li Xianlai was so angry that he stomped his feet. Gu Jinglian's arrogant attitude had completely angered him. If it wasn't for school, he would have flared up. "Mother of asterisk her, what the hell is this? What are you so arrogant for?" Li Xianlai planned to give this guy a good taste of his medicine. That, and parents. "Hey, calm. Hey. 3 people for legs." The rules of the 3-person, 4-person leg tide race were relatively simple. The parents and children were in one group, and each group had one leg tied together with a cloth bag. The bag was tied above the ankle joint and the calf near the knee. Then, they stood up and started running at the same time. In the end, the first one to reach the finish line was the winner. Chapter 3405. When Chu Ho was working at the Public Security Bureau, he had come across this game at an event held by the Bureau. However, Gu Jinglian had never heard of it. They were in the second group for the preliminary round. The 3 of them stood in a row, with Chu Ho on the left and him on the right. Xiao Bao was naturally in the middle. However, Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho were really too tall. Xiao Bao couldn't even hug their waist when he stood in the middle. Xiao Bao didn't have much confidence. He felt that this game was really too difficult. However, there was a prize for first place. A super big doll. Xiao Bao liked it very much. Children of his age had almost no resistance to furry toys. As a prize, it was different from buying one himself. A prize meant honor. Xiao Bao naturally looked forward to it. Hence, he asked Chu Ho, "Mom, can we win?" Chu Ho glanced at Gu Jinglian, then looked at Xiao Bao and said, "It's not a problem to win, as long as your dad doesn't drag us down." Gu Jinglian heard this and snorted disdainfully. He said mockingly, "Who's the one dragging us down?" Xiao Bao whimpered and tugged at Gu Jinglian's sleeve. "Dad, you have to win. I heard that the prize is a very big toy." Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. His tone was unusually gentle. "Got it." Teacher Shui raised her whistle and swept her gaze around. When she saw that all the parents and children were ready, she clapped her hands and said, "Is everyone ready?" "Ready." "Then, let's invite the parents to bring their children to the finish line." Teacher Shui counted down. Accompanied by a loud whistle, a group of parents brought their children to the finish line with great difficulty. The rules were simple, but the game was difficult to play. Not only did it test the tacit understanding between parents and children, but due to the difference in height, if the steps of the parents were too big, the children would inevitably not be able to keep up. They might even fall. The fat boy was in the same group. As soon as he whistled, the three of them rushed to the finish line in a flurry. The father and son were eager to win. When they were close to the finish line, their steps were hurried and they dragged the little fellow down with them. They were in quite a sorry state. In the beginning, Gu Jinglian could not coordinate with Chu Ho. The two of them carried Xiao Bao and stumbled. The main reason was that Gu Jinglian was too tall, which became his biggest disadvantage. He had always been arrogant, so it was impossible for him to cooperate with Chu Ho. Chu Ho tried to cooperate with him. In the end, he barely managed to reach the finish line in second place in the group and enter the finals. Xiao Bao cheered, feeling that he was one step closer to victory. However, Chu Ho despised it to death. "You're so clumsy." Gu Jinglian was originally at a disadvantage. His desire to live had been aroused, so he was a little unhappy. When he heard her say that, his expression became a little dangerous. "Who are you calling clumsy?" I said, "Mom is talking about me." Xiao Bao stood between them and said with a head full of cold sweat, "Mom must be saying that I'm clumsy." Gu Jinglian was speechless. Chu Ho was speechless. Xiao Bao complained, "Sai, it's all my fault. I'm so clumsy that I dragged you guys down to get first place. Don't stumble in the finals." Chu Ho said, "Otherwise, Xiao Bao's first place will be gone." Gu Jinglian said, "Don't worry." Chapter 34:06. When they were preparing for the finals, Gu Jinglian tied up his legs. Suddenly, he thought of something and hugged Xiao Bao's shoulder. With his lift, Xiao Bao was lifted up a little and was almost lifted into the air. Ah! When Chu Ho saw this, he immediately understood his intention and hugged Xiao Bao's other shoulder. The two of them were carrying Xiao Bao in their arms. This way, they only had to worry about the coordination of their feet. Gu Jinglian said, "I'll use my right leg first. You use your left leg first." Chu Ho nodded and said, "Okay." As soon as the whistle blew, Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. Chu Ho also moved. This time, the two of them cooperated exceptionally well. They took turns to kick and were terrifyingly coordinated. The group of people watched as the two of them instantly left the team behind them more than 10 meters behind and strode towards the finish line. In the end, the two of them felt that walking was too slow and actually started running. They approached the finish line like a whirlwind. "Oh my God, look at them. They're actually carrying the child. They're so strong." Some parents wanted to imitate them, but the men were fine. However, most of the mothers could not lift their children. Instead, they were flustered and embarrassed. While many parents were still struggling at the starting point, Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho had already carried Xiao Bao across the finish line. Teacher Shui blew the whistle in shock and announced the winner. "First place, Gu Qingze." The chubby boy was so angry that he could only stare. He said angrily, "It's all Daddy's fault. He let Xiao Bao steal the limelight. I can't accept this." Li Xianlai was also not in a good mood. After being ridiculed by his son, he was even angrier. In the end, the other parents' teams also reached the finish line one after another. The second and third places were also decided. Shanger was very happy to be in third place. On the podium, Guqingzi stood on the highest step with his hands behind his back. He looked proud. Shanger said enviously, "Xiao Bao, your parents are so awesome." "Of course." Xiao Bao patted his chest proudly and said, "My mom used to be a police officer. She can subdue a strong man to the ground with one hand." So powerful. Shanger was dumbstruck. Teacher Shui came over to give out the prizes. The second and third place prizes were stationary. There were crayons and cartoon sharpeners. The first place prize was a meter-long doll. Xiao Bao was so happy that he hugged her tightly and grinned from ear to ear. Standing below the stage, Gu Jinglian looked at the little guy on the stage. The ice on his face finally broke, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. Chuho inadvertently caught a glimpse of the smile on his lips. He was startled for a moment before curling his lips into a smile as well. When the parent-teacher conference ended, Xiao Bao was still reluctant to leave. Today was probably the happiest day of his life. There was Daddy, Mommy, and him. In the end, the three of them competed in a competition and even won a prize. Everything that he had never dared to imagine had actually happened. It was so happy that it felt surreal. When they left the kindergarten and walked to the parking lot, Xiao Bao was hugging the heavy doll. Chuho offered to help him carry it, but he was reluctant to let go. "Mommy, I'll carry it." Xiao Bao hugged the doll like it was a treasure, his face beaming. "This is Xiao Bao's prize. No one can snatch it from me." Chapter 34:07. Before he could finish speaking, a shadow flashed past him. Little chubby boy appeared out of nowhere and slammed him onto the ground. Xiao Bao was caught off guard and was knocked to the ground. Immediately after, his arms were empty. The toy had been snatched away by Nuo Han. Gu Jinglian turned around and saw Xiao Bao on the ground. Chuho immediately went forward and picked up Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao was in pain from the fall, but he held it in and did not cry. When he looked over, he saw that little chubby boy had already snatched his toy away and was holding it in his arms. Li Xianlai and Nuo Han's mother were standing at the side, looking at them with gratification, as if tacitly allowing their child to do so. Gu Jinglian's face darkened. Chuho was furious. He shielded Xiao Bao in his arms and said coldly, "What do you mean by this? Are you condoning your child to snatch someone else's toy?" Nuo Han's mother said disapprovingly, "What do you mean by snatching? The child is not sensible. It's not as serious as you make it out to be. Isn't this snatching? Taking something without permission is called stealing in the dark and snatching in the open." Nuo Han's mother heard this and was quite angry. She said angrily to Nuo Han, "Nuo Han, return the toy to him. What kind of toy do you want? Mommy will go to the counter and buy it for you. Why do you want someone else's toy?" Nuo Han pouted and said, "I don't want it. I want this. I like it." Xiao Bao complained angrily, "If you like it, why don't you win it back with your own ability? Mommy and I won this toy. Return it to me." "I'm not returning it." Nuo Han also replied angrily. Who asked Xiao Bao to steal all the limelight at the parent-teacher conference today? Little Fatty was so angry that he couldn't vent his anger. Nuo Han's mother saw this and immediately said to Chu Ho, "It's just a toy. How much is it? I'll buy it." Then she took out a Chanel wallet from her bag and fiddled with it, as if she was fishing for money. Buy it with money? Huh. To Xiao Bao, the value of this toy could not be measured by money. In the eyes of such a young child, there was no concept of money at all, only sacred honor. In the eyes of a child, a few $100 bills were not even as valuable as a few red flowers on the blackboard. Buy with money. Who was this woman insulting? What's more, how much could this toy be worth? It could be bought outside for a few hundred yuan, but in Xiao Bao's eyes, it wouldn't even be sold for a few million yuan. Xiao Bao said, "Who wants your money? I won this toy, and it belongs to me. Give it back to me." As he spoke, he broke free from Chu Ho's arms and rushed in front of Nuo Han. He was not afraid of his strong physique. Little Fatty was taller than Nuo Han, so he was naturally stronger than Xiao Bao. Therefore, he did not put a little bean like Xiao Bao in his eyes. When he saw Xiao Bao running over to take the toy back, He did not even look and pushed him. However, he did not expect that Xiao Bao had come prepared. Instead, he fiercely returned a punch. The reason why he was so easily hit by him before was because of Nuo Han's sneak attack. He was not prepared at all, so he was caught off guard and fell to the ground. But now he was prepared. Moreover, when he was at the Gu family, Uncle Fu did not train him for nothing. Chapter 34:08. Usually, he looked cute and adorable, but that was because he was gentle. Uncle Fu had also taught him not to fight with other children. Hence, he looked like he was easy to bully. But in reality, with one punch, Nuo Han fell to the ground. Taking advantage of this moment, Xiao Bao reached out to grab the toy in his arms. Seeing that his precious son was being bullied, how could Li Xianlai let it go? Thus, he walked over and stretched out his leg to kick Xiao Bao. Fighting between children was a matter between children. As an adult, he could only stop it. But not only did Li Xianlai intervene, he even wanted to kick Xiao Bao. How could a child's strength be compared to an adult's? Before Chu Ho could react, Gu Jinglian had already strode forward, grabbed Li Xianlai's collar, and pulled him in front of him. You're asking for death. He threw a punch and directly knocked Li Xianlai to the ground. His back hit the concrete floor hard, and the pain made his face turn red as he arched his back. Chu Ho widened his eyes in shock. He couldn't believe it. She had followed Gu Jinglian for so long, but she had never seen him fight personally. He had a serious obsession with cleanliness, so he never fought with others. Moreover, he had many bodyguards around him, so it was not his turn to fight. This time, however, was an exception. Because the movement was too big, his clothes were a little messy. Gu Jinglian tugged at his tie expressionlessly and glanced at him coldly. Beside him, Nuo Han was so scared that she cried. Nuo Han's mother pointed at her angrily and said, "Why are you hitting people?" She directly pointed her finger at him with her head held high. But this really violated his taboo. He hated it when people pointed at him with their fingers. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "I don't hit women." Chu Ho smiled coldly and walked forward. She grabbed Nuo Han's mother's outstretched finger and twisted it gently. With a crack, the finger was broken. Nuo Han's mother knelt on the ground weakly. Her face was contorted in pain, and she cried herself hoarse, as if she wanted to use her cries to attract others. When the fat boy saw this, he cried even louder. However, even though the mother and son were crying so hard, no one approached them. The huge parking lot seemed to be isolated from the rest of the world. Little did they know that Gu Jinglian's men had already sealed off the parking lot. All the parents were blocked outside and could not enter. Moreover, they did not know what was going on. Gu Jinglian walked in front of Li Xianlai expressionlessly. He lifted his long legs in disgust and lifted Li Xianlai's chin with the tip of his leather shoes. His cold gaze swept over Li Xianlai. What are you doing?" Li Xianlai was frightened by the cold sharpness of his body. He had never seen a man with such a terrifying aura. Gu Jinglian hated his face. He kicked his face to the side and said coldly, "You spoil my appetite." "What did you say?" "If you don't know how to discipline your child, do you need my help?" Gu Jinglian said casually. "By the way, I'll teach you some rules." "What do you mean?" "I don't like to talk nonsense with people. It's fine if you don't understand." Gu Jinglian squatted down and carried Xiao Bao in his arms. He stood up and said to Chu Ho, "Let's go." Chu Ho nodded and followed him into the car. Chapter 34:09. Li Xianlai was still confused. He looked in the direction of his departing figure and saw Gu Jinglian carrying Xiao Bao and getting into a Rolls-Royce Phantom with Chu Ho. He recognized the limited edition Phantom, which was worth tens of millions. However, he realized that the license plate of the car was actually 5/8. He still remembered that this special license plate was not something that could be measured by money. Without a special background, it was impossible to get such a license plate number. The Phantom slowly drove out of the parking lot. A number of black Audi A8s followed behind and escorted them away. Li Xianlai was speechless. He did not know who this man was. How could he travel in such a grand manner? Could it be that he really had an extraordinary background? Not long after the car left the parking lot, Li Xianlai did not have time to comfort his wife and children when he saw a group of men in suits coming over. He subconsciously protected Newhan in his arms, only to see them pass by him and walk toward his car. He had specially driven a Porsche over today. It was worth millions. This car was even bought with a mortgage. However, he saw the men in black suits surrounding the car. Although they were unarmed, their aggressive posture made Li Xianlai extremely nervous. "What are you doing?" Just as he finished speaking, he heard a voice. "Smash it!" Li Xianlai sucked in a breath of cold air and immediately rushed over, only to see a few men in black facing his Porsche, ruthlessly kicking. These people were all well-trained fighters, not to mention that they were unarmed. Even a casual punch from them was enough to shatter his car window. "Stop!" Li Xianlai was so anxious that his eyes were about to burst. He rushed over, only to see the men kicking and punching the car door and bumper into pieces. A few places were dented. The car window shattered into snowflakes. Some of them even exploded. The windshield wipers were also broken. Even the glass was smashed beyond recognition. Two men rushed over with iron rods in their hands and started smashing the car. Newhan's mother was so frightened that she screamed. Li Xianlai was so anxious that he stomped his feet. However, due to the large number of people, he did not dare to stop them. He could only watch helplessly as they smashed and smashed his beloved vehicle. Newhan's mother pushed him and said, "What are they doing? Hurry up and call the police." "Are you crazy?" Li Xianlai turned around and glared at her. "Can't you see? They are all from the Hay Society. Call the police. Go to hell." Then what should we do?" Li Xianlai gritted his teeth, but he could not think of a way. In just a few minutes, he could only watch helplessly as his vehicle was smashed into scrap metal. In the end, he could not find a single complete piece. After smashing his car into scrap metal, these people left quickly. Before they left, they said, "This is just a warning. This is just a warning. This is just a warning. Be sensible. You hear me?" With that said, the group's mother's father. Newhan was scared out of her wits. Newhan's mother looked at the smashed car and wanted to cry. She mumbled, "What should we do? Who are they?" "I guess." Li Xianlai's breathing